exactly sure why, but, oh, okay. Maybe that's what it was. Not sure. So we have that comprising of about 75% of our overall score. Final's gonna be worth 20%, and then remember your homework is 5. So we will be taking Kaplan tests soon. So if your score is overall it's above 75%, then those Kaplan points will be added. So it can be enough to put your grade up to the next grade level, or give you that plus on your transcript too, which could help your GPA as well. So keep an eye open for those. Those are coming up. When you're preparing for Kaplan for mental health, it's on all of mental health that's supposed to be covered in nursing school. So there are going to be some things on there that are not covered in this class. Like it might have been things covered in N11 and 12, and might even be some things that are covered in N22. But majority of the content is covered in here. But for example, you might get asked questions about like ADHD. You might get asked questions about dementia, things like that. So we don't cover that in this one because our curriculum here, they kind of spread it out everywhere. It's not just in one spot. So if you're studying for that, just be aware that you might see maybe 10 to 15% of your questions that are on those other subjects. But for the most part, you'll be very well with the things that we cover in this class. That's a large majority of the items that you're going to see for that.
What are the averages that people get to be able to?
I don't remember it off the top of my head, honestly, what it is, but we'll post that for you later on. Yeah.
So, do we get 5 points added towards the final or percentage? How much?
It's just your overall score, so it doesn't matter where it goes. It's just
But how much is it?
5 points.
We
Yeah.
have 2 of them, right?
Yeah, and you have 2 of them. You have one in leadership, and then that one's really strange. Honestly. That one's a strange one, and then mental health's a little bit more straightforward. So most students do well on both of them, honestly. So.
It's not the what are prisoners to a jail to like an
The
elephant
question on
to
the
a
donkey or
circus.
something
Oh,
like
Yeah,
that.
that was so stupid.
For this past exam, pretty good on my content overall. There's just 2 things that I wanted to talk to you about. So remember, we always look at all the items and we look for if there's any issues with any of the items, and we make adjustments if needed. But in particular for this last exam, we had problems differentiating between what is an accurate statement versus therapeutic statement. Be careful about those because those are asking 2 very different concepts. So accurate is looking for like a fact or a piece of information. Therapeutic is talk to me about my feelings. So make sure when you're looking at your items, especially for Kaplan in the final exam and NCLEX, because you're going to get a lot of those questions on NCLEX, be careful. What is the difference? Is if it's accurate, I need to tell a fact. If it's therapeutic, let me focus on the way they're feeling. Big difference with those. The other item that people kind of got tripped up on was related to cage questioning. So make sure we go back and look at cage questioning. Cut back, annoyed, guilt, and eye opener, right? Anxious is not part of cage questioning. So
Man.
I think maybe just because it'll select all that apply, people are just like, oh, forget it, I got this one wrong. I'm not going to even try on this one. But go back and look at those. Cage questions, a popular one that we'll probably most likely see in Kaplan too. So just go back to that. And remember, if they're saying yes to 2 or more of those, it's basically saying that this is significantly impacting the person's life. And we're also seeing this transition to other types of behaviors and substances. They may not just be exclusive to alcohol. We can also use this for other things as well. So,
What do you guys do moving forward to prepare us for the questions that you guys ask when the format of how to put the answer in is different? Because there's like a few where we have never answered a question like that, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know I was supposed to move it. Is it stuck in the Dropbox?
they'll probably add,
the
there probably should have been directions like drag the box up.
Yeah, I looked
But-
at that. I think that kind of creates
I
a
even-
pause where we're just like, what do we do?
That's the problem with the exam software, because it's supposed to say that in there, and they told us it would, and it wasn't. So that's why I was like, oh, okay, there's a problem with that one. But it'll always tell you like directions like drag, highlight, You might get some questions in the future again where it's just like a block of text and you have to like select and highlight the text and then submit that as your answer too. As far as giving you like practice questions for those can be created in multiple different ways, like the matrix questions that you guys have been getting where it's like 2 columns and it says like, quality 1 and quality 2. I mean, it could be 3 columns, it could be 4 columns, it could be presented to you in so many different ways. So there's not really a way to give you practice questions on those because the way that those questions are designed is to really make it, here's this unique problem, you've never seen it before, figure it out. That's what they're supposed to do. But as far as the instructions on how do I do it,
I mean, I
should
think
be on
the
it.
instructions with the mods, or let it be a part of the homework so we can get used to how to work I guess, the student or
Yeah, I mean, and that probably could help a little bit, but you could be given a unique question where it's just like, what do you want me to do? Like, what is this unique thing that you want me to do? How do you want me to solve it?
That's just like how.
Yeah.
I like
So,
it,
but it'll tell you like drag, it should tell you in the future, drag this box up or highlight or select all, something like that. But again, we look at the question and if the stats don't look good on it because
Well, I
maybe
guess that the
instructions.
question was fine, it was just like, okay, how
Yeah.
I didn't know what, I've never seen it.
Yeah.
Even if it's on practice, I feel out of
It's not good. It's just, those are brand new questions. You guys will see those on A class.
So my eSchool see the virtual for the exam?
On the ATI, you'll see them.
Yeah.
So if you go on ATI Engage,
following that trend.
you'll be able to do practice questions. And I think you guys have access to adaptive quizzing. You'll see them on there too, so that would be good practice too. Okay, yeah. Oh, they do have them on there now? Okay, yeah. Prep you, yeah, just for like
It's kind of by the
practicing those
library.
style of questions.
in downtown.
Okay. All right, so moving on from that exam, then we're going to start talking about the new content for today. Here's the objectives that we're looking at for today's seminar. There's quite a bit on here. I just wanted to make sure that you point out, talking about objective number 16 and 17. Those are going to be in a separate reading for you all, so it's not going to be in the same section. This is going to be on the section for personality disorders. But don't forget those 2 at the bottom there. So I'm going to have 20 questions based off this material, and then probably like an additional 6 or 7. That's accumulative. So it's an accumulative exam, so I'm not going to be asking super specific details on things. It's just going to be the general objectives from all the other seminars. So, but it's going to be primarily based on these objectives right here. So we're going to take some time to really go through most of these. You're going to realize as you go through these that there's a lot of words about mania and bipolar and drugs that talk about mania. So that probably means my focus when I study for the finals should probably be about, out of all the mood disorders, I should really focus on like bipolar. So bipolar is when we take a look at that, bi meaning 2, pole means end or opposite. So it's just someone who has 2 ends or opposites with their mood. So if we can understand bipolar, then we'll understand depression, we'll understand everything else that falls in line with that. So that's my recommendation when we're looking at this stuff here. The one that's tricky that you should not sleep on is number 6. There's a lot going on there. And don't pass this one up. Describe differences among different classes of antidepressants. So, know your intended side and adverse effects for all of our antidepressants. Overall, for this section of today's content, you have to know like 9 classes of drugs. So that's going to be a really important piece of it. It's not going to be the only thing that you're questioned on. I mean, that's only one objective out of all of these, but I'm just saying that within this, there's like a lot of things that I could ask you. So we'll go over some of the major concepts. I'm not going to go over things like fluoxetine causes an upset tummy. I'm not going to go over things like that. But some of the more concerning ones, like fluoxetine can make you want to kill yourself. Like that's more concerning that we'll talk about today. So again, know your intended side adverse effects for those drugs. That's kind of one that people tend to skip over, but don't do that. But this is what we're talking about 20 questions on the final, just on this stuff, and then an additional 6 or 7 on the other content. But we know the structure, we know how this works, so, if you have any questions with any of these, just email me. Email me, say, hey, I don't get objective number 2, or could you help me better understand this or that? More than happy to do that. If you're stuck on your case study that I give you every week, just, send me the question, we'll give you some feedback on it too. I don't wanna just have like 2 or 3 people just constantly sending me, even if it's a simple question, you're not bothering me, so just send it to me.
As far as the final goes, are you gonna be med heavy on that? You've had a lot of meds for psych.
There is a lot of meds for psych. There's most of them are gonna be on today's content, but when we think about interventions and what we do for people, that's, if we look at that upside down pyramid, it's probably only like 30% of what we actually do. Most of our things that we can do are like verbal or non-farm based. So, go over those interventions. That's why we had a whole seminar just on how to speak to people, because that's largely what we're gonna be doing for mental health. The drugs, it's just very simple action. I just give it to you. This doesn't take much for me to do that. So,
Thank you.
but there are serious implications to that. Okay, we're good with the objectives. I'll take 2 more questions max. Khalil, go ahead.
Are you going to cover antipsychotics here? Because I know in Mania we have to use antipsychotics too, or that will not cover?
Is this a trick question?
Mental
Yeah,
against
you
mental.
answered it yourself. Yeah, we're gonna go over it today. We're gonna go over it. We're gonna see them again because we need them. Yeah, we're gonna see them for bipolar, so we're gonna go over them again. Specifically the 2nd generation drugs. No, those ones for sure. Okay, one more going once, going twice. Yes.
So for the final, would you recommend like studying the new content like it's a normal exam and then just looking back at our notes and stuff for the old content?
I'm gonna have a whole workshop tomorrow on that, if you wanna come to it. I'm gonna try to record it, but I'm doing one for the entire school of nursing tomorrow on how to study for a final exam. I'm also gonna be posting like a little meditation thing to do before the exam, so keep your eyes open on that. I'll post it on the Health Related Science Engagement Center too. But in a nutshell, you're gonna start from your weaknesses to your strengths, in a nutshell. You're gonna study for these 20 questions as you would for any other exam, but as far as the other ones, we'll talk about that in the workshop. Okay, let's start getting into this then. Let's do it. Our website for today, domingueznursing.com/moodkrcc. You don't have to use this again. This is just supplemental, but if you want to use it, it is here for you. moodkrcc is the extension at the end. A lot of good stuff here. I have a good little story podcast here for you to listen to that might be kind of interesting to look at. Some other videos on here too. The same old stuff. Our onlinequestions.org event number for today is 14997. Again, that's 14997. You could always just ask me a question the old-fashioned way, raise your hand, that's fine too. You could set up audio recording if you want, set up video recording if you want, I don't care, that's fine with that. Just, again, don't remix me and put me on TikTok and do stuff like that, please. Okay. All right, last little bit for today, or for the term. What are we talking about today? Our umbrella classification here is going to be mood-related disorders. Mood-related disorders. Within this umbrella, this is like pop culture's favorite. We like to see a lot of this in TV shows like major depressive disorder. We have that one that we mentioned all the way at the beginning of the term, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, where it's like, hey, these people's, or women, their mood can really fluctuate during the onset of the menstrual cycle. It could look like bipolar, but it's just related to the influx of hormones there. We also have like a special type of like pediatric type of depression, persistent depressive disorder. We just have one called seasonal affective disorder, meaning that, hey, it kind of people's moods fluctuate with the seasons, largely related to the amount of natural sunlight that is out. That can really cause your levels of vitamin D to fluctuate, and vitamin D is a big influence on mood. And then we also have bipolar. Now, part of our objectives is also looking at another umbrella. This is not in the same classification. We're looking at personality disorders. Specifically within this one, we're looking at cluster B. And out of these personality disorders, the ones that I really want you to pay attention to the most are going to be antisocial personality disorder and borderline personality disorder. So I'm just going to briefly touch on those right now. I'm going to put a little star right here. I want you to pay attention to antisocial. Why? Because those characteristics make them danger to others. And then I want you to pay attention to borderline. Why? Because their characteristics make them danger to self. So out of all of our personality disorders, these are our most concerning one because they really do cause the individuals, when they express these types of personality traits, can make them danger to others or danger to self. Antisocial used to be called like a psychopath or sociopath. We don't call them that anymore. It's just antisocial. Remember that these people are not born with these personality disorders. They're usually a product of how they were raised. So, for example, antisocial personality disorders, I've been raised to manipulate others to the point of harming them to get what I want from them. So you have money, you have something that I want, I'll hurt you, I don't care, I don't have empathy, like I don't care about how you feel. And it can go to the point of actually performing like criminal acts, and a large part of like the incarcerated population do meet criteria for antisocial personality disorder. And then borderline personality disorder, again, our cluster B all revolves around manipulation. So borderline is like, you have something that I want or need, and I will go to the point of hurting myself to manipulate you to get that from me. So the classic example is like, you're breaking up with me? Fine, I'm going to kill myself if you break up with me then. Oh, okay, good, now you're not gonna break up with me because you feel bad for me. That's like a classic like borderline type trait. I'm really not going to go too much into depth about these because, as you can imagine if I diagnose somebody with borderline personality disorder and they complete suicide. Who's going to be held liable for that? They're going to say, you misdiagnosed them. They didn't have borderline personality disorder. It was actually major depressive disorder. Now they killed themselves. This is your fault. So it's very rare that you'll see these actually in the client's charts. What you will see for sure in MedSurg a lot too is you'll see cluster B-like traits, cluster A-like traits. So they're just saying, it looks like this, but I'm not going to go on record saying that they have this diagnosis, but be careful because I'm seeing a lot of manipulation. I'm not seeing classic signs of other type of mental health disorders. It looks like this is purely behavioral, and they're just doing this to manipulate others. So be careful about that. When you see those in your charts, that's what they're talking about. You'll see this in MedSurg all the time. You know, give me my pain meds. Oh, you're a terrible nurse. You're the worst nurse ever. They see that splitting mechanism happen, but they'll actually go to the point of harming themselves. Like, I'm actually going to overdose. I'm actually going to cut myself. I'm actually going to hurt me or hurt somebody else, which makes them rather unique and kind of concerning out of all of our personality disorders. So, what also falls in here too is like narcissistic personality disorder, where it's just like, it's kind of all about me. But again, I'm not going to spend too much time on these. We're going to really focus on our other type of mood-related disorders. So remember, all of this stuff comes from the good book, the DSM-5. Within this good book, it says what? I'm going to categorize my disorders according to signs and symptoms over time. And when I have those two variables, it allows me to make a spectrum of severity, where I have severe and I have mild, for example. The one that we're going to be focusing on the most severe and chronic type of mood-related disorder is in fact going to be bipolar type 1. Bipolar type 1, meaning that the person has the most severe symptoms and they have it for the longest period of time. So when we just dial back the symptoms a little bit where it's not as severe and it doesn't last for as long, we have this middle of the road approach here. So you're going to see things like bipolar type 2. It's not as severe, symptoms don't last as long, so we call it bipolar type 2. Realistically, if I want to be very specific, bipolar type 1, those symptoms can last for 7 to 10 days. You don't have to memorize this, I'm just giving you context. Bipolar type 1 is like 7 to 10 days. Bipolar type 2 is like 4 to 7 days. And then logic says, what do you think that the less severe one is called when it's only like 1 to 3 days? You think it would be called bipolar type 3, but no. It's called cyclothymia. I know. It's called cyclothymia. And this is just saying that, hey, this person's having mood fluctuations that last for about 3 days, and then it kind of subsides. Cyclothymia. Now, we could get even more specific, and we could put different specifiers for each of these, like bipolar type 1 rapid cycling and bipolar type 1 depressive type, where they just tend to have more one type of episode over the other. It doesn't really matter for us. So I'm not going to go into the specifics of all the specifiers for each of these different types of disorders, because we're going to treat them the same as nurses, so we don't really have to go into the depths and details about all of those. So, but this is what it looks like. We're going to focus most on bipolar type 1 here, because if we can understand bipolar type 1 and all of the intricacies of that, everything else falls into line. So if we could understand when it's at its most severe, how do we treat it at its most severe? Then it's just a matter of, oh, you have bipolar type 2, I'm going to treat it the same. You have cyclothymia, I'm going to treat it the same. You just don't have the symptoms for as long, and the symptoms aren't maybe causing you to have as many acute issues as like bipolar type 1 would. Okay. So we've seen this structure before, it's nothing new. We're just plugging in different words here. Actually, I don't think we're going to be learning any new symptoms today. All the symptoms that we're going to learn today, we've seen before. If anything, I highly recommend you go back to your psychopharmacology chapter and really look at how neurotransmitters work and what they're responsible for when they're high and low. That'll be really helpful for today's seminar piece if you want to get a good grasp on the material. If you don't really want to sit there and have to memorize everything, and just go back to the neurotransmitters and understand, like, what do they do again when they're high or low? That'll really help you understand what's going on here too. So if you didn't do that for your substances, go back and do that. If you did do that when you studied for your substances use, it's going to be very helpful for today. It's basically going to look like the person's either intoxicated on a stimulant, or it's going to look like they're kind of intoxicated on a depressant kind of. But we'll start looking at those. Okay. So what's actually going on here? If we're going to draw this line here, this is going to be baseline mood. Baseline mood. It is perfectly healthy for us as healthy individuals, mentally healthy individuals, to have fluctuations in mood. It lasts for about a day. So we have our moods go up and down. We can't control that fluctuation. Usually, it just happens and it balances on its own. Our own feedback mechanisms is able to kind of help us find balance. And even when we encounter something like a stressor, a distress, or eustress is like a positive thing in your life. That's kind of a change in environment. Usually when those types of things happen, it causes us to, our mood goes either up or our mood goes down because of that. But it doesn't last forever. So maybe when you got your grade on your exam yesterday, maybe you felt really good or maybe you felt really bad, but how long did it last for? It didn't last for too long, right? You might be still feeling some residual from it, but that initial reaction of just like that emotional response to seeing that grade, it doesn't last forever because your brain says, these neurotransmitters shouldn't be like this. This is too much or it's too little. I need to upregulate or downregulate to find that balance. However, with bipolar, that mechanism with whatever it is, we don't exactly 100% understand it, they do not have that feedback mechanism. It is not as in tune as someone who is mentally healthy. So to varying degrees, when they encounter a stressor, a eustress or a distress, their mood just keeps going up. Or I'm gonna put a little slash here because it's or their mood will go down. And I'm being very dramatic like that because their moods will go very, very high or will go very, very low for extended periods of time. So for like bipolar type 1, their mood doesn't just feel good or feel down for one day. It feels good or feels down for like 7 to 10 days. And it's not just like, oh, okay, I'm gonna try better next time, or I feel really good, I'm gonna pat myself on the back for that. It is very dramatic. What's basically happening when we encounter those stressors, those neurotransmitters are being affected. Particularly, we're looking at our monoamine neurotransmitters. So when we're looking at mood, it's going to be regulated by dopamine, it's going to be regulated by serotonin, it's going to be regulated by norepinephrine. So when I'm seeing somebody go into what's called a manic episode, when their mood goes up, what's basically happening is they're having increased levels of dopamine, increased levels of serotonin, and increased levels of norepinephrine for 7 to 10 days straight. Vice versa, if it's in a depressive episode, or they'll call this MDE, major depressive episode, or it'll be called mania. If they're in a major depressive episode, it's the same thing, same neurotransmitters. We're looking at dopamine, we're looking at serotonin, we're looking at norepinephrine. Those are going to be in lower levels than normal. The longest time I've seen someone go into a manic episode is for about 15 days. This is usually why when you guys did your mental health rotation, you probably saw the same clients there that had bipolar. Like if they had bipolar, you saw them probably either for your whole rotation or 2 to 3 weeks. They didn't just discharge after 3 or 4 days because they're in this acute episode that can last a while. So they really need to be monitored for that entire time. So just by looking at these neurotransmitters, you can probably already start to figure out what are the signs and symptoms going to be of mania. Without even reading your book, I can tell you, or you can tell me right now, based on these neurotransmitters, what signs and symptoms do you think we're going to see in mania? What signs and symptoms do you think we're going to see in a major depressive episode? You should already have a basic understanding of what am I going to see because of that. So for example, if my dopamine is very, very high, what do you think might be a symptom of mania? Hallucinations and delusions, yep. Serotonin's really high. What do you think you might see with that?
Super.
Really, really happy, hypersexual, yeah, in your face, can I smell and taste your hair kind of thing, right? Anyone have that in their clinical rotation where they're just like in your face wanting to talk to you? The concept of like social space goes out the door. It's just like, I love you, you love me, let's get together and you know, it's just like, it's not there. So norepinephrine, what do you think's gonna happen with that?
Idols.
You can't sleep.
Yep,
They
vitals will
only
be
get, like, 3 hours
elevated,
of sleep.
very energetic, very difficult for me to sleep. Yep, you'll see all of that too. So, and then if we're looking at the major depressive episode, we know dopamine's low in some areas of the brain, that could result in like negative like symptoms of schizophrenia. So we can just go into our brain's file system, click on copy, click on paste. Right there, it's going to be like negative like symptoms of schizophrenia. Look very, very similar because it's the same low level of those neurotransmitters. In particular, serotonin will be like very low mood. We'll see disruptions in sleep and appetite, and then very low energy, lethargic, poor motivation, things like that. So that's the preface. That's what we're looking at here. That's what we want to kind of pay attention to when we're thinking about mania and when we're thinking about a major depressive episode. Again, don't be so stuck on the time frames of how long this has been going on for specifically, but just know that there's a spectrum of severity. Some people have it for 3 days, some people have it for 7, some people have it up for 2 weeks at a time. You might remember sometimes in your client's chart, you would see specific types of bipolar, like rapid cycling, meaning that it happens like about 2 to 3 times per year. Normally, in bipolar, it only usually happens like 1 to 2 times per year. So it's not something that should happen multiple times per year. It's usually a more severe type. Okay, so we kind of have an idea of what those symptoms might be. We'll kind of call them out more specifically in just a moment, but that's kind of what we're looking at. So now that we kind of have this picture in our head of what this looks like, let's actually see what it looks like in real life. So what we're about to do, we're going to watch a clinical vignette of a person who is experiencing bipolar type 1 manic episode. Here's what I want you to look out for. Draw this template on your paper, right? I'm looking for risk factors, which breaks down into diathesis and stress. For bipolar, diathesis and stress. If this is actually diagnosed, it's related to genetics. Meaning that what? If it's related to genetics, is there a cure? No. Not with today's medicine, at least. We're getting very close, but no cure with this. This is a chronic type of mental health disorder. They'll have to manage this for the rest of their life. Not all mood-related disorders are like this, though. Like, there are some types of depression that are only onset by stress, which means that I can cure some types of depression. That's largely related to this theory called neuroplasticity, meaning that our brain isn't just stuck the way it is for the rest of our life. Our brain is always fluctuating with how it regulates its chemicals, the structure of the neurons and how those are placed throughout the brain. Those all react to changes in the environment, both psychologically and physiologically. So that kind of explains why people fall into depression and develop that. And it also explains why people are able to cure and get rid of the depression. But as a side note, the depression could also be related to genetics too. It just depends. But if we're seeing it only onset by stress, that's kind of good. That means we can cure it. But we're looking right now, risk factors, diathesis and stress, looking for that genetic component, looking for the stress component there. Remember, risk factors is history. What happened in their history is what we're looking at. Not what's happening right now, not what stressors are happening right now, but what has happened to them in the past. That's kind of what we're looking at. Then we're going to be taking a closer look at those signs and symptoms. We haven't outlined those specifically yet, but I want you to keep an eye out for those neurotransmitters at least. Do you see signs and symptoms? Dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine. Do you see signs of increased levels of those? And if we want, we can also start to outline this according to our mental status exam, right? And we can write out aseptic to help us chart those signs and symptoms. Once we have these two pieces of information, then we can start to figure out of all the problems my client has, what's my number one problem? What is my priority here? We'll use Maslow's to help us out with that. This tells us, what is my number one problem? Once we have all that information, we'll hand it off to our medical provider, and they will assign a DSM diagnosis. And they'll write those orders for admission. We'll be in this acute phase of treatment. We know in the acute phase of treatment, no matter your med surg or mental health, we're all looking at interventions to stabilize whatever your number one problem is. What is your number one problem? How do I stabilize them? We're not going to go too much into the continuation and maintenance phase for these individuals because there's a lot going on in the acute phase. So we're really going to focus on the acute phase and what do we need to do for that. But every disorder, mental health med surg, it always goes in this cycle: acute, continuation, maintenance. And remember, when we're thinking about maintenance, it's all about how do I prevent this from happening again. Okay, so here's our notes, here's our outline. Let's watch this video. This is going to be of two community health nurses that have been called in to do an assessment or a wellness checkup on an individual in the community. These are actual positions that you can do. There's some mental health hospitals that still do this, and they'll just employ nurses to just drive around and just do assessments on people to see whether or not they need to be inpatient or if they can be managed outpatient too. Let's take a look at this. Let's see how this turns out. The person has a heavy accent, and it doesn't help if I turn captions on. It doesn't work, so I'll do my best to translate afterwards.
Of course, if I knew I was going to have visitors, I'd have made something proper. I've been shopping. Oh, I had a fucking brilliant time. I bought a fur coat for my fella. You should meet him. He's really popular. What way his line of work and all that. I shouldn't really talk about that, should I? You fucking killed me. I'll get a drink. Do you want a drink?
No.
Wine or brandy? Oh, fuck, we haven't got any left. Never mind. Don't worry, I'll go to shop. I had a really lovely lunch. What's that posh restaurant down the street called? Jason eats when he's out. He's gorgeous. He's a bit like a cat. You like cats? I fucking love cats. Yeah, I don't know what to do about ours though because, I'm pregnant and my friend Susie, well, she says that cats are bad because they've got bacteria and they're shit and all that. The cat shat in the mat and stole my hat. Mind you, I haven't seen ours for ages. Did you see a cat when you came in? I reckon the neighbours got him. Probably holding him hostage or something like that. Fucking hell. Do you think we should go and check? That bitch next door doesn't even know how lucky she fucking is living next door to us. Huh? Anyway, what are you doing here? What do you want? I'm great. I feel great. I booked a holiday, got some new gear and I booked a holiday. Oh, so much to do. Need a wee break. I had a brilliant sleep last night. Hey, Jason. Oh, he gets a little bit tense sometimes. He says I talk too much, which gets on his nerve, but he's a moody fucking bastard sometimes, isn't he? Have you got a fag? I put my fags down somewhere and I'm fucked if I can remember where I put mine. You smoke, eh? You got a fag?
No, I haven't.
Oh, well, you're no fucking good, are you? How long are you going to stay?
When?
Because Jason's just gone round the corner to drop
Hello.
some gear off and he'll not be very long, so I'll be a bit jealous if he comes back and finds you here with me. You're quite skinny, aren't you? How tall are you? I should be a model. I should think I'd be a great model, eh? I should do films, eh? I was on the telly last night. I've been on the news, I heard them talking about me. Jason gets me to do shitty things with his mates. Yeah, and I bet he films me. Yeah, but that's all got to change now, isn't it? It's all got to change now that I'm having a baby and I'm going to keep this one. I'm going to keep this one and we're going to move it to London. Jason's really lovely, even although I know I piss him off at times. He's fucking lucky to have me, do you know that? Fucking, do you know what? I need a fag. I bet you should put some over here. Hold on a second.
Tell me a bit about your boyfriend.
He's gorgeous.
How long have you two been together?
Forever. We were together in a past life. I'll look after him if you know what I mean.
But I'm not sure that I do.
Come on. I saw the way you were looking at me. You're not bad looking, actually. You know, you should let me help you, chill you out.
From some of the things you were saying about Jason,
What the fuck are you worried about Jason for?
it seems like you've got a very sort of up and down relationship. How are things at the moment?
Oh, everything's fine. Yeah, you shouldn't listen to what other people say, should you? Where is he anyway? He should be back by now. Doesn't he know I need him here right now? He's not going to go anywhere, is he?
Does that worry you?
Everyone needs to be loved, don't they? I trust people. I love everyone. That's why I spread myself about so much, because I'd be way too much for one person. I'd drown him. I know! Let's go swimming! Let's go swimming! Or we could go for a sauna, we could all go together, and then I can show my new underwear off to all those tars.
Hannah, we need to try and stay focused
Oh,
on
you're
this.
such a fucking drag! I just want to have some fun. Come on!
Well, looking around and looking at you, doesn't look like there is much fun. Tell me, where did you get that eye? Where did that come from?
Oh, that's nothing. I've been really busy and I just smacked it. It's just, I'll heal in a couple of hours. I heal really quickly.
It looks like someone's hit you.
Jason would never hit me.
Has he hit you before?
Yeah, but it'll never happen again. When's it coming back?
I'm not sure. Listen, Hannah, it looks like you're really struggling to cope with things right now.
That's crap. Everything's brilliant at the moment, and I'm not going to let you ruin it just because you're some fucking jealous bastard.
We've noticed that the lock on your front door is broken and the flat is a total mess. You're having trouble looking after yourself.
Yeah, well, I knew about the lock. And the flat's a mess because I've been really busy. I've got really important things to do.
We think that looking after yourself is the most important thing you can do at the moment.
What are you worried about me for?
Well, we don't think that you're coping very well. And I'm wondering whether there's a part of you that can see that.
Okay. I'm okay. It's a bright day a long way away.
Perhaps things aren't really okay. Because it sounds as if you've been really feeling stressed.
Well, of course I've been stressed. Oh, I've got lots on and I felt a lot of pressure because of Jason, and I've not been able to sleep, and well, there's lots going on.
The fact that you haven't been eating, drinking, or sleeping properly makes it very difficult to cope with things.
I've been too busy. I eat what I want. Anyway, I'm the perfect size. Jason hates fat birds.
I want to ask you a bit more about what stresses you out. What kinds of things do you find stressful?
Maybe there are things that stress me out. Maybe there are things that I'm worried about now that I'm pregnant. Oh yeah, I know. You mean now I'm eating for two? Never thought about it like that before. You know my mate Susie? She's got 3 kids, all at different blokes. Maybe that's why she's so fat. She eats so much fat cow. Hey, she's really smart though. She showed me the ropes. Yeah, not that I'm full on like her. Oh no. I just do it, for fun and that. She's a bit of a smart kid,
She takes heroin.
Of course she does. You know that. That's how I met her, through Jason.
Does Jason do smack?
Oh no. He doesn't, but he knows lots of people who do. And he knows how to get it. But I don't take any of that. Oh no. Tends me to sleep.
Okay. There's lots going on, and what we need to do is...
What's going on? I fucking love Marvin Gaye. Even though he's like 1,000,000 years old, he really reminds me of Jason.
It's difficult to stay with things, isn't it? I know you and Jason are very close, but there's some things that we're very concerned about that's happened in this relationship.
Like what?
Well, I'm worried about your safety. You said Jason hit you in the past, and I'm worried about where you're living. I think you could do with some help and support, and that's what we're here for. I think it would be helpful for you to come into the hospital for a while.
What are you talking about?
Well, we can help with things that you're finding stressful. Getting healthy again.
No way, this is my home. You're not fucking taking that away from me. No fucking way.
That's not what we're talking about.
Who the fuck do you think you are, coming in here and telling me what to do? You're not even a fucking real doctor. Why didn't you send a real doctor here? You can just fuck off right now.
It's time for her to step in.
All right. How are we feeling after watching that? Emotional reactions. How are we feeling after that? Anyone see someone like this in clinicals? It's very common, actually. Very common. Friends like this, you said? Someone else said exhausting. That was only like a 5-minute video. Imagine being like that for an hour. Imagine being like that for a day, 7 days, 2 weeks. Very, very exhausting, right? A lot of concerning things going on here. So let's kind of take it from the top here. So risk factors. Did we hear anything about diathesis?
No.
Did the nurses ask anything about a family history? Okay, so I probably want to ask something about that too, right? Remember, we don't want to just go out and say, does anyone in your family have bipolar? Because, whether they're diagnosed or not, usually people will just give you incorrect information because they don't want to be associated with that term. But just asking about the signs and symptoms. I mean, anyone in your family ever had periods where they would be, really, really happy for like a week or so more, or feeling really, really down for a week or more, and then they kind of come back to normal? But that's something I want to look out for, is that diathesis component. Stress and risk factors. So what are some history or historical stressors that she's been through? Remember, psychological and physiological. So let's start with psychological. Anything in her history that we could classify as a change in environment, psychologically speaking? Okay. That's all psychological, right? My relationship ended. That's a change in environment that's just purely psychologically based. In other words, can only really be experienced by her, right? I can't experience your breakup. Only you can. That's a psychological thing. Anything else from history?
Physical life abuse.
Kind of both, but she said I'm going to keep this one.
Okay.
Medical, but losing it.
Yeah, that's something that was very subtle. Yeah, right? She said, I'm going to keep this one. So maybe is there some type of history of abortion, or was that a voluntary thing to terminate that pregnancy? That's a big stressor too. not just psychologically, but also physiologically too. That can be a major piece there. Anything else psychologically speaking? Anything else?
Well,
Okay.
socioeconomic, I guess.
Okay, yeah, kind of hard to tell. Doesn't look like she's in a great living situation, especially if the door is broken and it hasn't been fixed. The apartment looked like it was kind of a mess. Kind of hard to tell. Who knows? Maybe she's balling. I don't know, but it didn't look like that in that video, right?
She doesn't know where
What
cats.
about, was she drinking? Was that like open alcohol?
Yeah, open alcohol, right? And it sounds like she was really using a lot of nicotine too. So those are some other psychological things to think about. Going over to physical. What about physical?
Her eye.
Her eye physical abuse.
Okay, potential domestic violence or interpartner violence, that could be a thing. What else? Pregnancy, that could be a thing. Substance use. She said, do you use heroin? No, because it turns me to sleep or it makes me sleepy. So she uses heroin too, right? So that's also something that's there. Most oftentimes people will try to self-medicate when they're in a depressive episode. So I'm going to take like a stimulant and then it makes things worse, or vice versa, that I need to sleep. So I'm going to try to drink a lot of alcohol or do a benzo or something to try to help me sleep, and it makes things worse.
Maybe she's not eating enough. She's like, oh, Jason or anyone doesn't like fat girl or something like that.
Yeah, he said Jason doesn't like fat butts, so she wasn't eating that much. So that's kind of concerning too. Okay, that's all just risk factors, right? A lot of different stressors going on. What about the actual signs and symptoms? What do we actually see here? Did we see signs of increased dopamine?
Yes.
Through what? What do we analyze those to be?
Delusion?
Delusions. Yeah.
Delusions of what?
She thought somebody was
That
kidnapped.
she could be a model.
Okay, grandeur.
Well, no, she kept
Yeah.
on saying like the
Grandeur,
camera.
delusions of grandeur. I could be a model. I was on the TV last
Yeah.
night.
Oh, yeah.
What else?
She said somebody was kidnapped.
What was that?
She said somebody was kidnapped. Maybe the neighbors got
Yeah,
her.
yeah. Her
The
cat was
cat.
kidnapped, right? What is that called? You did this.
Yeah.
Persecuting you. You did this to me, or you took my cat. Okay, what else?
She's going on vacation.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if she's actually going on vacation or not, right? But that's what she believes. What else related to increased dopamine?
Lack of sleep.
Serotonin. Huh?
Lack of sleep.
Yeah, very
A
hyper.
little bit more towards norepinephrine.
She was kind of like hypersexual with the doctor. Like, always
That's serotonin.
Yeah, she
That's
kept on
serotonin.
throwing herself
What
at
about
it.
dopamine?
That she could make him happy or.
Yeah, that's the hypersexuality with the increased serotonin
Oh,
sex
yeah,
drive.
she's
Just
pregnant
talking
for
really
sure. That
fast.
could be a
Flight of ideas.
Flight of ideas, good. What about the way she was speaking? Think of positive like symptoms. Was she exhibiting positive like symptoms? Word sounds just a jumble, but really close to what? Clang. Clanging, right? She was writing the words cat shat in the mat and stole my hat. Yeah, that's definitely clang associations related to the increased levels of dopamine. Anything else? The loose associations. When did she exhibit loose associations?
The whole time.
Meaning that you say something and they take it and loosely associate it with something else. Well, what was her name again? Hannah? I don't know what her name was.
Yeah.
It looks like there's a lot going on here. And then, what's going on? What's going on? She starts saying that's a loose association, right? They see or hear something and they loosely associate it with something else. So we're seeing a lot of positive like symptoms. So again, why? Because dopamine is high. So same thing like with schizophrenia in some parts of the brain, dopamine is high. So we don't really have to learn a whole bunch of new symptoms. We're gonna see positive like symptoms of schizophrenia here because of that high dopamine. Serotonin, high levels of serotonin. We'll see disruptions in appetite, disruptions in sleep. Hypersexuality, elevated mood. Did we see those?
Mm-hmm.
Definitely, right? Definitely saw those, right? A lot of sexual comments towards the nurse, like, I could help chill you out if you want. And then he was like getting all bashful. You're like, yeah, that's something fun.
Is that serotonin or norepinephrine?
Serotonin for a sex drive? Yeah, libido. Okay, what about norepinephrine? Did we see the fidgeting? When I was zooming in on her knees, she was just kind of, very restless, fidgeting, had to get up and keep moving around, right? That norepinephrine was high too. So we're seeing all those signs and symptoms because those neurotransmitters, remember the part of the brain that's able to control that mechanism of up-regulating and down-regulating, it's not functioning correctly. So she's in this state where all those neurotransmitters are very high. So thinking about Maslow's hierarchy, she looks like to be maybe in mid-20s to late 20s, so I'd probably put her in intimacy versus isolation. With her current signs and symptoms, is that affecting her ability to become self-actualized? Okay, I would say so too. Her self-esteem, is there a problem with her self-esteem? If you were to ask her, how do you feel about yourself?
I think she's really right. I'm gonna be a model.
I'm great. I feel great right now. I've never felt better. So it wouldn't look like there's a problem with self-esteem. It's inflated right now because those delusions of grandeur. I feel so good right now. I feel great. So we wouldn't see any problems with self-esteem when they're in a manic episode typically, right? What about love and belonging? Her ability to take care of her home, her job, her relationships. Is she maintaining those basic roles and responsibilities? No, not able to maintain those basic roles and responsibilities. Safety. Would anyone write an involuntary hold on her right now?
Yeah.
Why? Some people are saying gravely disabled. Okay, I mean, that's your judgment call to make. I would probably do the same thing too, but there are definitely some concerning things here.
If she was further along in her pregnancy, like giving birth, would you give the baby to her?
Well, that's like up to the county to decide. They could make an argument to say that it's not a safe environment. If they were to do a formal community health assessment and talk about her socioeconomic or living condition, they probably wouldn't. But yeah. Okay, so safety is definitely a concern. What about physiological?
Oh yeah, lack of sleep.
This is tricky. Is there any actual physiological problem? Who didn't eat breakfast today? Does that mean I could write an involuntary hold on you because you're gravely disabled because you're not eating?
Most likely.
At what point does it become malnutrition?
Emaciated when she becomes like.
I mean, sure, he looks kind of thin, but again, I mean, how would I know that someone's malnourished?
Eyes.
I could do labs, I could do vital signs, could tell me, right? So, what I'm trying to make a point here is that she's at a physiological risk. There may or may not be actually any problems, but there's a risk. There's a risk for fluid electrolyte imbalance. There's a risk for cardiac dysrhythmias. There's all these risks, but nothing actually happening. So our risks are going to be secondary to my primary problem. So although her risks is very low on Maslow's hierarchy, that's not going to be my number one problem. My number one problem is going to be the actual. So what is the actual problem lowest on Maslow's hierarchy? That's going to be safety, right? Same thing in med-surg too, so be careful about your risks versus actual problems that are happening.
What if she said she didn't sleep for like 2 weeks? Verbalize, I haven't slept in like 2 weeks.
What are some signs and symptoms you would see of someone who's not sleeping? How can you back up the claim? Because she could be delusional. She could maybe sleep every night, but she's saying that. So how can you back up the claim with, I'm seeing some problems with sleep? It's going to make it really hard because usually we'll start to see people become very disoriented and start to have mild hallucinations, but that's also part of the disease process too. So really can't do much with trying to objectify sleep or lack of sleep. That's going to be hard. Okay, so if we were to write an involuntary hold on Hannah and she comes into the hospital, gravely disabled, our problem that we're stabilizing, can we all agree that our main problem is safety? Our second nursing diagnosis is going to be risk for malnutrition or risk for exhaustion, something related to the fact that she hasn't been eating, she hasn't been sleeping, and she's been like this for 7 to 10 days. That's I think we can understand that. That's a risk, and she's constantly moving. She's burning the calories. She's cashing those checks, but no money in the bank, right? So we're gonna have some problems here in a moment with her. Okay. Let's get into these actual signs and symptoms then.
If we were to take vitals from her, would she be tacky?
Yeah.
High blood pressure?
We can expect that, especially because we know that norepi is gonna be high. And given the fact that she's not eating, overall blood volume goes down, so then the heart will try to compensate by increasing blood pressure and heart rate. So But that's more hemodynamics, which you guys will talk about next term.
Do they hear like command hallucinations too?
It can be any type of hallucination, yeah.
Any positive?
Anything, any type. Less likely to see bizarre behaviors though. You're not gonna see much of those, but the other hallucinations, delusions, alterations in speech, yeah, you're gonna see that. Okay, so this person comes into the hospital, she's on this involuntary hold, she's here for gravely disabled. We know we need to stabilize her safety. That's the number one thing that we're keeping an eye out for. I'm going to introduce you to a set of symptoms that are called neurovegetative symptoms. You might not see that in your textbook because it's more of an advanced terminology, but I think it's a good way to kind of look at how are these neurotransmitters affecting this person's their sleep, their appetite, their concentration, their energy. We classify all those into neurovegetative symptoms. So a nice way to help us remember that is sake. I know that's SACE. You guys don't remember SACE, but I know you'll remember sake. So sake is an acronym we're going to use, and it stands for what again? It stands for sleep. It stands for appetite. It stands for concentration. And it stands for energy. So when the client is experiencing mania, what will sleep be like? Think of Hannah when you're taking this exam, or maybe in future in practice. What will my client's sleep look like in mania? It's going to be poor sleep. What was her appetite? Poor. What was her concentration? Poor. What was her energy? Very high. Now the opposite of the bipolar, right? The bipolar mania, the opposite of that is a major depressive episode, MDE. You're going to see the term dysfunctional. Dysfunctional means it could be up or down. So we're going to see dysfunctions in sleep, meaning that the person could have increased or decreased sleep. You could see dysfunction in appetite, meaning they're eating more than usual or not eating enough. Poor concentration, poor energy. A major depressive episode. This also works for major depressive disorder too, so you can just copy that over for when you're looking at those other things, the other types of disorders. So our job here, we said we need to stabilize that. So I want to start thinking about what interventions can I take that are non-pharm? So I don't want to hear meds right now, but what can you do to help promote sleep?
Exercise.
I'm hearing milieu. What did your facility do when you were in your clinicals? What was something that's different from MedSurg?
Quiet.
Quiet times, and what else? They make them go to sleep and wake up at certain times, right? So sleep routine. What else is very closely tied to this is going to be the circadian rhythm that goes in cadence with the sun. I know it sounds kind of like I'm going like kind of far out there when it comes to the sun, but it's really not. We really want to have as much sun exposure during the day as possible. Again, that's going to help me produce or synthesize vitamin D, which is really good at helping me control mood. So as much as we can, we want to try to expose our client to sunlight during the day as much as possible. Most facilities will have periods of time where they get to go outside. The more you can put them outside, the more likely it is they're going to be able to restore that sleeping pattern. It'll help a lot. So be mindful about that. My sleeping patterns, trying to get them outside. Sometimes it's like, oh, we're only going to let them go outside for 30 minutes. Or they go outside for an hour or 2 hours, but they have a blanket on the whole time, so none of their skin is exposed. Please just educate them on, we need to kind of expose you to some sunlight. This is going to be really good for you too. There are some places in the world where they just don't get a lot of sunlight, like Pacific Northwest. So they might actually prescribe like a daily dose of vitamin D, like you need to get this on a daily basis because your skin is not making it. Sometimes I'll actually prescribe them to go to tanning salon. You have to go to a tanning salon 3 times per week to help your skin synthesize its own vitamin D because you're not getting enough of it. It's causing a disruption in your mood. So sleep routine, what else is closely tied to sleep is where they're placed in the unit. So I'm going to put room placement. If I'm in mania, do you want me closer or further away from the nursing station? When I say nursing station, I mean source of activity. So do I want them closer to the source of activity or further away? Further away, right? And that's gonna be nice too, because it's gonna have them to have to walk back and forth on the unit, burn some of that energy, right? So further away from the nursing station. If I'm in a major depressive episode, where I want increased supervision, I'm gonna put them closer to the nursing station, right? I wanna make sure that the person feels included when they're in a major depressive episode. I really don't wanna just put them into the corner or some crevice of the unit where no one's paying attention to them. So increased supervision, major depressive disorder, bring them closer to the nursing station, that would be ideal.
So
Well-
sorry, are these interventions for both? For mania?
Yeah, and then I'm just specifying for room placement for each one what you might wanna do. Appetite. What can I do for appetite? Thinking about Hannah, when she comes in, think about what she's been eating, or what she hasn't been eating, more likely. So she comes in 7 to 10 days like that. What can I do to help her appetite, or help the fact that she hasn't been eating much? What can I do as a nurse?
High calories.
Look at her fridge.
I like high calories. What else?
Look in the fridge, the cupboard.
What kind of foods though?
Yeah.
Okay, foods that she likes. I like the high calorie. That's good. What else? Do you think that Hannah, when it's mealtime, she's gonna sit down with the rest of the group and sit down and have a meal with everybody? She's not gonna be able to do that.
Maybe just drink.
Even just having the conversation, she was just, I need to get up and start moving around. And then her food gets cold, and then it doesn't taste good, and then she doesn't eat it. So that doesn't help if I'm giving her a regular tray. So what can I put on her tray that is consider the fact that she's constantly moving around?
Insurance.
Finger foods.
Finger foods, in combination with high calorie. So high calorie finger foods, and try to put a protein value with that food too. So I'm gonna put finger foods.
Yeah, because they like to go to the locker and get snacks and put them in their pockets.
Which will be okay, as long as they're not doing too much of that. Because especially when it comes to depression, if they're eating more than usual, then we want to try to limit that and educate them on how they're going to gain weight if they keep eating too much of this. Especially if they're on an antipsychotic second gen, that's going to increase that appetite, so you got to be careful about that. So you will see this question on the NCLEX, you will see this on Kaplan. It's a golden question. They love asking this, and it's always a select all that applies question. I promise you, they love asking this question. The nurse is working on a unit with a client who's been diagnosed with bipolar type 1. The client receives a meal tray. Which of the following items should the nurse remove? Or which of the following items should the nurse include? Something like that. And it's gonna have a bunch of different food, and then you're gonna have to pick, what do I keep on the meal tray for them, or what do I remove from the meal tray for them? I promise you, you're gonna get that. It's just, they love asking that because they think it's hard. It can be tricky. So, you're gonna see, A, chicken noodle soup. No. B, spaghetti. Don't be the nurse that has their client walk around spaghetti fingers all over their Don't do that. It's all over their chest too and everything. Don't do that. It's yes, you could eat it with your hands, but it's not meant to be eaten with your hands. You might see chicken nuggets.
Yeah.
That's okay. Chicken nuggets are fine. Chicken strips are fine. Sandwiches, roast beef sandwich, whatever, that's fine. Steak fillets, salmon fillets, I've seen those options before. What hospital are you going to when you get steak and salmon? But think about that. If it requires utensils, she or my client will not have the concentration to sit there and grab a utensil and start to eat it like that. So, which means that it's going to be unlikely for them to finish whatever you gave them. But if I could give them a protein shake, great. Sandwiches, great. Something they could hold in their hands and eat, fine. Beans, rice, things like that, no. If it says a burrito, sure. The burrito's handheld if you want to throw all that stuff together and make it like that. What about option D, celery sticks?
Yeah.
They're not high calorie.
You guys would have got that question wrong. You guys would have got that question wrong. It's a finger food.
What if we put peanut butter in it?
Ooh.
Yeah. So if option D says celery sticks with peanut butter, sure, that's fine. I've seen sometimes it says carrots with honey, and I'm like, who are you? Who does that? But that doesn't have calorie value and protein value, so no, that wouldn't be right either. So be mindful about that. what are they mixing it with? Does it have a calorie protein content? And they'll try to trip you up. Generally speaking, try to stay away from the dark leafy vegetables that are like handheld because they're not gonna have what the person needs, especially in mania.
What if it's a chicken salad?
The chicken salad wrap, sure. But if it's just a chicken salad and you need a fork, no. And again, don't be the nurse where they have like branch all over their mouth and walking around. If they're vegan, they're gonna be eating those seitan chicken strip things, or what is it called?
The what?
It's called
Satan.
I think weird calling it Satan.
it's like it's a meat substitute. It's really tasty though.
They'll be like,
It's good.
Miso soup.
no, they don't. So usually they'll just give them like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich instead, which isn't the best, but I mean it's better than nothing.
I have noticed a lot of the meal options that they
Okay, yeah.
Fritos.
I know they're vegan burgers because of bread.
They were, yeah.
One patient told me this like I had a vegan burger yesterday.
But that's gonna be very difficult. So the question was asked, what if someone has diabetes and they're in mania? It's gonna be very difficult for them to manage that because typically our liver stores excess, glycogen to help us manage between meals. But the person's always in this fight or flight response, so their body's constantly telling them that cortisol's released. Use energy. So typically that source of glucose to manage in between meals is depleted. So you really have to make sure you monitor them and give them those snacks and be very mindful about what you're giving them in between different meals because it'll be very difficult for them to maintain their blood sugar.
What neurotransmitters for appetite again?
Serotonin, largely serotonin. And we say dysfunction because it could be increased or decreased. Okay, so she's on the unit. We got her meal all set aside. We set up the sleeping routine. She just went outside for a couple hours. She's back inside now. We're thinking about, okay, there's gonna be a 1 o'clock group, a 2 o'clock group, and a 3 o'clock group. I don't wanna just send her to her room. That'd be the worst thing to do, right? I wanna keep her included in treatment. So what type of group activities would be ideal for someone with poor concentration?
Drawing.
So it's gonna be our simple single step. I'm gonna give you the rule. Simple single step activities. If it's a simple single step activity, they can do it. So let's put simple single step. And I'm just saying it like that because Kaplan, NCLEX, all that stuff, they'll throw all kinds of activities at you and you just have to ask yourself, is this a simple single step activity? If there's multiple rules, or a lot of steps to follow, don't select that activity. So what would be some simple single step activities? Someone said coloring, that's very easy to do. Like bingo? Bingo, I just have to look at a number, okay. Sometimes they'll do color bingo instead because sometimes the numbers are too much, so it'll be like a simplified version. Anyone been on their units and they see puzzle pieces and you're like, why are those pieces so big? That's fine, because that's what we wanted. We don't want to give them those 1,000 puzzle piece, all black pieces, right? And it's just like, good luck trying to solve that one, right? Be very mindful about what activities I'm giving for my clients. A lot of clients will play like dominoes or Uno. Did anyone get to play that with their clients or see that? But be careful about that, right? The moment they start playing all those special cards down where it's not just colors and numbers now, that's reversal card. Which means that you skip a turn and then it goes back to that. Well, I'm playing by Uno 2019 rules, so you don't do that with that card. And then the client will start to get frustrated. You'll see it. What does that mean? I've never done that before. You're cheating. You're cheating. You'll see that happen. So be careful about when you're doing those types of activities. Do not introduce too many rules. Okay, we'll talk about physical activities in just a moment. Ping pong's fine. Simple single step activity. So you'll typically be seeing, here are the groups that are happening at 1 o'clock. Which one would you refer Hannah to? And I'll give you a list. Here's all these different groups happening. What are you going to send her to? Reflective journaling group. Probably not a good idea. Music therapy. Fine, you just have to sit there, listen to music, that's okay. But just think about that. If it involves you having to do multiple roles or use a lot of different skills, don't do it. Don't do it. You're gonna see the client get very frustrated. One time I had a client on the unit that wanted to play poker, kept bugging me, just let's play poker. And I'm like, no, I'm not gonna play poker because there's so many rules and so many steps. He was like, no, believe me, I'm really good. I could teach you how to play. Like, I was like the 2018 Inland Empire champion for poker. And I was like, okay, there's delusional thoughts, right? I was like, no, I'm not gonna play poker, So then it was my third shift coming back, and the night shift nurse came on, and he was like, yeah, man, so be careful about this guy. He's gonna want to play poker a lot. And I played poker with him, he got really mad. And I was just like, I didn't hand that off in report. I didn't think at the time that was gonna be a big deal, like telling him, don't play poker with this guy. So he ended up playing poker with him, and they started playing the cards. In his mind, he was like, I know how to play poker, but I can't concentrate. I can't get at that level that I'm used to. So he started getting frustrated and started saying the nurse was cheating, started saying that other clients were cheating, that you didn't have that card, you only had 4 cards, now you have 6 now, you're cheating. Long story short, this person actually was like the 2018 like Empire not world champion, but champion for poker. And he just wanted to play that and teach us, but his mind was not at that level to teach and be able to play at that level. So, use other types of activities. Just be very mindful about this one, because this is the one that most nurses don't pay attention to, and they just think that, oh, anything's fine. But, hour later they find themselves in a code situation because the client's like starting to get very aggressive now. So be careful about that. Yeah. If they got it. Yeah, so the question, when do they introduce animal therapy? Like equestrian therapy, or I've seen cat therapy, dog therapy. It just depends. Usually they have to have a volunteer there to do that. I worked on a unit one time, they brought a whole no joke pony onto the unit. It was a mini pony though. They brought a mini pony up onto the unit, and
we had goats and chickens and bunnies. So
it didn't go well. One of the clients started fondling the genitals of the pony. Yeah, don't do that to the poor pony. Don't do that. The pony looked like it liked it though. Okay. But other than that, we would have regular like dog therapy. Dog therapy was fine. They just bring the little dog in, it just lays down, they get to sit there and pet it. Okay. Moving on. So this last component, energy.
But I'm scared of goats.
You said scared of ghosts or goats?
And chickens.
Okay. Okay. I can see that. They're kind of weird. Energy. What am I doing for energy?
Sorry,
Trying to decrease.
Think about that risk. That risk is there. Hannah's been like this for a week and a half. The rest of the unit's going to the gym. Do you want me to let her go to the gym?
No.
I mean, it depends what they're doing in the gym. If you're okay with delegating that task to the CNA to watch them. But really, the only thing that we want to do is just tell them to walk. Anything that's going to raise that heart rate, like, you don't have to memorize this, but just a good rule of thumb, like anything that's like 20 to 30% above their baseline heart rate, don't do that activity. Don't do that. So even like simple calisthenics, like sit-ups, push-ups, things like that, don't do that, because that can really raise the heart rate up and the body's gonna start demanding energy. I need energy to keep this going. And it'll start to pull it from different organs in the body to try to keep the body going. The mind is just gonna keep saying, go, 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 go. And they'll keep trying to do the activity until they go into a rest. So basically only walking. Sometimes they'll say like ping pong. Okay. Basketball, no. If they're playing like horse or something, that's fine. You're not going to do 3v3, bring your boys, put your Nikes on and do 3v3 with these guys on the court. Don't do that. That's not going to be good if you do that.
Could you do like yoga, like stretching?
Depends. I mean, if I saw yoga as an option on there, I would probably pick it, but I think it's like if you're doing like California yoga where it's just like turn the temperature up to 110 and we're gonna make you stand in plank for 10 minutes, like that's kind of intense. But if it's just like simple chair yoga or something, that's fine. Simple stretches. This is my favorite part about mental health, is because as nurses, you always have these other things that people like to do. My big thing was like music, so on the weekends I would do music therapy, and I would bring my keyboard and another nurse played guitar, and we talk about how music would be therapeutic. We just go around to different units, so it was just like, man, I'm getting paid $75 an hour to just play music to people, and I'm a nurse like doing that. Other nurses did yoga, so they would do yoga groups. So they would go to music therapy, then after that they do simple yoga routines, and the nurse was a yoga instructor too, so she did the yoga groups for the day. So it just depends. Just be mindful about what you're doing for these clients, and just you know, what type of things am I letting them go to. So I'm just gonna put walking. Simple. If you're like legit volleyball, that's probably too much. Because you think about it, if it's a competitive sport and they really start getting into it, that's a problem. Because you'll start seeing them like trying to spike every ball, trying to run and jump all the time. So that's when it's just like, okay, we need to stop. Or let's tone it down, we're just tossing the ball back and forth, that's fine. But if you start seeing them run and start doing all these things where they're really active, just be very careful about that.
I think we're talking about walk for both mania and
Yeah, depressive's fine. I mean, what this all relates to, everybody, is if they're eating okay, then it's fine. But if they have a history of poor appetite, and you could see that they're really restless and they're not eating their meals, then that's when you tie together that I need to limit their activity because they're at that risk for exhaustion. That risk for exhaustion should be made when they first come in. So if that diagnosis is made, you know, the nurses make that diagnosis. If that diagnosis is made, then you got to be mindful about this. You will not get orders to do this. Anything that's on here. Provider will not order this. So if you do not do this, which most people do not, you're going to have a lot of problems for yourself. So be mindful about these things. This is your responsibility to take care of. Quick story. I was working night shift one time, and there was a new nurse. It was like his third day on the unit. He's like, "Hey, Brandon, so we just got a new admit come in at 7 p.m. I took care of it for you. I got all the med reconciliation done. All the admin paperwork is done. We're just waiting on the UDS to come through, but he's basically already admitted. You don't have to do anything." I'm like, "Oh, thank you so much. That's really nice. Let's go talk to him right now. Let's go see how how his day went." He's like, "Oh, we can't right now." I'm like, "What do you mean we can't?" He's like, "Well, he's down in the gym right now." And then I'm not even kidding. At that moment when he said, "He's down in the gym right now," code blue to the gym, code blue to the gym, code blue to the gym. And then I already knew. I was like, "That's our client." In my head, I'm like, "That's our client." And the nurse's face was just like he, at that moment, he realized that he had messed up. Right? So we go down to the gym. Sure enough, there's our client, the corner of the gym over there on the floor. They're starting to do compressions on him. He had been manic for 15 days. 15 days not sleeping, not eating, and just constantly spending all that energy, right? So when he came onto the unit, our policy is you can't let him go down in the first 24 hours anyways, but the nurses knew, so you let him go. The CNA said that, yeah, when we got to the gym, he was so energetic and said, "I bet you I could run 4 laps before anyone could do 1. So they said, "Okay." So, the first warm-up activity is just do a couple laps. So they said that, they had him go, and he just sprinted, full speed, just like running. He got to about 3/4 of the lap, and he started just doing that, and then just collapsed. His heart just gave out and said, "I can't do this anymore. Can't do this anymore." And then, so I'm running over there, and then the nurse was like, "What do I do? Do I go home?" And I'm like, "Yes, just go home."
Oh my God.
So he's like, "I feel bad." I'm like, "You should feel bad."
What happened to the guy?
We were able to bring the crash cart over. We sent him up to medical unit. He was stabilized. He came back a couple days later, but he didn't die. But he would have if we didn't do anything, most likely. So.
what happened to the nurse?
No, he was still. He didn't last too much longer. He lasted like 3 months more after that, but it was just. I think his education was just. They didn't emphasize mental health at all. So where he was at was just like, I don't understand any of this. I don't feel comfortable with any of this. So it was a big problem for him. Okay, so these are our non-farm interventions. So these might be asked in a question like, what should a nurse do first? What's a nurse's first responsibility? Or what is a non-farm intervention that a nurse should employ? What should a nurse plan for? These are all these concepts kind of tied into one. These are our verbal milieu interventions, basically.
And do you want us to consider if they're like in a depressive episode, mania?
I think the most concerning one is because the physiological risk is there for mania more times than it is for for major depressive episode. Major depressive episode, I think our biggest thing that we need to consider is the room placement. I want to keep eyes and supervision on them because when serotonin goes very, very low, my will to live goes as well, so suicidal ideations will be very common here, but we're going to talk about that later too.
I have a question. A lot of these interventions, they seem to be for mania. Or they
Yeah, just the same concept here. So mania, where we're talking a lot about this because it carries the risk of physical exhaustion. So there are some things that we talked about that are for depressive episode, like we'll come back to like talking about suicidal ideation. That's the biggest thing. But really, the overall theme for a major depressive episode is make them feel included because they won't want to do anything. They may want to sleep throughout the whole day. So again, getting them that sunlight is very important. Having them go to groups. If they say, I don't want to go to groups today, okay, can you promise me that we can at least do one? There's 3 groups today. We have music, yoga, and drawing. Can you at least try to go to one of them? Can you promise me that? Make that deal with me. That's kind of how you want to start going down that path for people who have depression, but we'll come back to it in a moment. Okay, we understand how we use this stuff, when would we employ this stuff. This can also happen on your med-surg units too, where your client's there for a medical issue and they're also experiencing mania because of the medical issue. And then you'll have nurses that are like, I can't do these types of clients, they're too much to handle. So I'm just telling you, this stuff could really help you out when you're managing these clients to wherever you end up working. You're gonna see this in your med-surg units too, and it's and mental health. So, okay, I think we're well due for a break. Let's come back at 9:05. Back at 9:05. All right, so we're out of here in about an hour or so. So what does the rest of the day look like? We're gonna go over medications. So I hope you ate something because this part can kind of be intense. Kind of, I guess. Some people say that. We'll go over medications, and then once we go over medications to manage bipolar, we're gonna go over into suicide and talk about some implications for suicide. Then we'll do a little bit of like a chart analysis, and then we'll be done for the day. Okay. So we talked about non-pharm and stabilizing the condition. Once we do our verbal milieu interventions, we're going to eventually need some type of medication. So let's map this out on how are we going to do this. So here is our baseline mood again. Remember, a mentally healthy individual have ups and downs. Even someone with bipolar can have their normal ups and downs, but if the stress is enough, when I say stress, it could be eustress, like a positive thing in their life. Like, I just graduated nursing school. That's such a big change in my environment. That could send me into a manic episode. Or my pet lobster ran away, and then that's a big stressor for me, so that send me into a depressive episode. They'll have their normal ups and downs, but it could send them into mania, or it could send them into a major depressive episode. It's not back-to-back. Someone had asked me, is this back-to-back? Do they go into mania and then a depressive episode? No, that's why I'm saying either or, so one of those things happens. There are some types of depression where the person tends to go into mania. That's more bipolar 1. There are some types where they tend to go more into depression, which is typically bipolar type 2, but it's not exclusive like that. That's just kind of statistically speaking. So what's the main problem here? Why is this episode happening? Because that regulatory mechanism of the brain, whatever it is, we don't actually know what it is not working correctly. So we need something to help stabilize the mood, something to create a buffer. I need something that can create a buffer that does not allow their mood to go too high, and it does not allow their mood to go too low. I need some type of medication that will do that for me. So the class of medication that does that, genius name, mood stabilizers. We kind of stumbled upon this though, completely by accident. The main prototype medication, so prototype means it's like the most evidence, it's been like the longest used, we have a lot of history with this drug. The prototype medication for a mood stabilizer is going to be lithium. Exactly how it sounds, everybody, it's the element lithium, usually combined with carbon. So lithium carbonate, and you give that client that salt. And it helps to balance the influx of cations and anions into the neuron. So it basically slows down that influx of activity. So that's what we mean by creating a buffer when we see lithium on there. we stumbled upon this very early on, like probably about a little over 100 years ago. And this used to be included in like medical tonics, 7-Up. There used to be a main ingredient in 7-Up. Lithium used to be part of it. It's actually kind of interesting when you look at some of the earlier advertising for 7-Up. I'm just gonna show you really quick because I think it's fun.
Wow.
One of my patients told me she saw her med on the table.
I love this one. Why we have the youngest customers in the business. Nothing does like 7-Up, but it has lithium in it. See, I used to say like the lithiated lemon drink, but they stopped doing that because they found out that you can't just give people a bunch of lithium because that's really going to cause some issues with that. So, but this is kind of why there are a lot of cultures today that, oh, when you're sick, drink some 7-Up. 7-Up will help you get over your sickness or your flu or something like that. Because it used to be way back when this was a medical tonic that would help people's mood not feel as crummy, like, oh, I feel sick, I feel terrible. So if I drink 7-Up, the lithium will help bring my mood up. So when I'm feeling sick, I won't feel as bad. But they don't do that anymore. But it used to actually be in lithium. Much like how cocaine actually used to be in
Coca-Cola.
Coca-Cola, yeah.
Coca-Cola.
Well, the lithium's not in it anymore. It's not a medical tonic anymore. It's probably more placebo more than anything that stuff that helps. There are some sodas that actually have ginger in it. Like if it actually has the ingredient ginger, not like a ginger flavor, that'll actually help with upset stomach. If the ginger ale has actual ginger in it, yeah, if it's not ginger flavoring, then yeah, it'll help. Okay, so mood stabilizer, lithium, that's the main go-to, the prototype medication. Not the one that's been used for the longest, but yeah, it's just the element lithium, exactly how it sounds. And again, it helps to balance the influx of those negative, positive charges in the brain, so it doesn't get too excited. If that is contraindicated, and we'll talk about why that would be in a moment, we're gonna switch on over to anticonvulsants. These will be off-label use. So when you look up a lot of these anticonvulsants like carbamazepine, lamotrigine, it's not going to say for mood stabilizing, it's off-label use. These kind of have similar properties in helping to maintain that influx of positive, negative charges in the brain. So typically used for seizures, so it doesn't allow the brain to get hyper-excited and go into a seizure-like state. Same thing at a lower dose to help balance the mood, set that buffer up for the mood. So it doesn't allow them to go too high or too low. If that doesn't work or is contraindicated, or if the person is rich, they'll use third generation antipsychotics. Those work really, really well. Aripiprazole, Abilify, things like that. So that's A number one, everybody. If I have a mood stabilizing problem, I'll use a mood stabilizer. It's just going to create a buffer. That's all that it does. So it just creates that zone to where they can't go too high or they can't go too low. But what happens if I'm already right here? What if I'm already out of the buffer zone? My mood is already very elevated. I've been like this for 6-7 days. I'm outside of the buffer range. What neurotransmitters are elevated right now?
Dopamine, serotonin,
Serotonin, norepinephrine, okay? Out of those three, which one are causing your number one problem? Which one is influencing your number one? What's our number one problem right now?
hallucination,
Safety, okay.
Delusion.
So out of dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, which one of those influences safety the most?
or dopamine.
Dopamine. Dopamine's gonna cause that. So I want a drug that could help the person regulate dopamine while they're in a manic episode. So step one is a mood stabilizer. Then you ask yourself an if-then statement. If, ... then. This is step 2A. If they are manic or mania, use second-gen antipsychotic like risperidone, olanzapine.
So
That'll help to curb that excessive amount of dopamine, help curb, balance out serotonin. But we only use that while they're in a manic episode.
Why not use haloperidol?
Probably not. I mean, they could, but the symptoms aren't usually that severe where it requires haloperidol. Because with haloperidol, now I'm introducing all those other potential side effects, which I don't really want to introduce into that. So they usually just use this because it's just a temporary treatment. Or If they're in a depressive episode, so if depressive, this is step 2B, use SSRIs like fluoxetine, sertraline, citalopram, escitalopram. This is, again, used temporarily to try to elevate their mood just a little bit so they're not feeling as suicidal, because that's influencing that safety risk the most. And then step 3. If the client has not been eating or not been sleeping, I want to give their body a chance to catch up. So I want to sedate the client if that's a problem. So for the most part, it is going to be a problem unless they're having a symptom presentation where they're sleeping too much. So in the case of a major depressive episode, remember serotonin could cause an influx of either too much or too little sleep. If they're sleeping too much, we can skip step 3. We don't have to worry about this. But for most cases, I need to sedate the client to give their body a chance to catch up. I'm going to use a benzodiazepine. Temporary, just a temporary treatment. What the person will need to take for the rest of their life is the mood stabilizer. That does not discontinue. That will be there for the rest of their life. Step 2, if they're manic episode or if they're major depressive episode, that's the meds that you want to look out for. And then step 3, for most cases, you're going to go to step 3. But again, if they're sleeping a lot and eating a lot, then you don't really have to worry about sedating them because they're getting their nutritional needs and their sleep needs met. So you don't really have to worry about that. So benzodiazepine like alprazolam or lorazepam will be used. And remember, it still carries the risk of addiction. So be careful. Don't keep them on this for more than like a couple days. So if you see that prescriber, you come onto your shift and you're like, holy moly, this is day 6 and they still have that benzo every day. Like, hey doc, can we probably start tapering this down or DC this? Like, give them a chance to sleep. Oh, sorry, it was oversight. I didn't really see it. Thanks for bringing it to my attention. They're managing sometimes hundreds of clients, not even kidding. So it's really up to you to kind of keep this in check and keep it in line. That's why we need to have this conversation.
So they will be getting all 3 steps?
Yeah.
If they're at the benzo?
Yep. If they're in an acute episode of mania and they haven't been eating or sleeping, they're going to have a lot of medications.
It'll be like a 3rd gen, 2nd gen?
You know, no, I mean, you wouldn't see a 3rd and a 2nd gen used. And I don't want to make the algorithm too complicated, but you would see like lithium and an anticonvulsant in use with risperidone and a benzodiazepine. But you wouldn't see, because the 3rd generation does the job of the 2nd already, so you wouldn't see them together. But we need to wait for the body to naturally come back down into that normal zone. So it takes time. Even though I'm on lithium, I'm on risperidone and a benzodiazepine, it takes a week or 2 for the body to come back into that normal mood balance. So once they're in that normal mood balance, these drugs will stop them from going too high or too low, or it just creates a buffer. If I enter a stress that's severe enough, despite my medication regimen, I can still go into an episode of depression or mania, even if I'm on meds. So that's where we come in. We really have to teach them like adaptive defense mechanisms, because the medication is just a temporary crutch. What they really need to understand is, how do I manage my stress without the use of medications? That's kind of what we have to think about when it comes to these individuals. Any questions about this? So, I mean, just with this alone, we have to know 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 classes of medications. We're not done yet either. We have to still talk about depression and stuff. AC, sorry, anticonvulsants.
What were some of the examples of the anticonvulsants?
I have them in the med list, but like carbamazepine, lamotrigine, valproic acid, Depakote, is a very common one too.
So we give these 3 during an acute episode, maybe the benzo if they're not sleeping?
So we only need 1 mood stabilizer.
Right.
And then step 2 is what episode are they in? So that'll be a 2nd med. And then if they're not eating or sleeping, then we'll use a third med, benzo. Temporary. Step 2 and 3 are temporary. They should not be discharging in steps 2 and 3.
So step 2A is if they're manic,
Mm-hmm.
and step 2B is if they're depressed.
Yep, yep,
So it's one of those.
yep, exactly.
And if you're on lithium, you don't need to be on an anticonvulsant.
Yeah, so if I'm on a mood stabilizer, it's only one of those. So I'll either be on A, B, or C.
Fine.
And imagine if I had over 100 clients reaching 200 and they have this type of medication list, it's just too much for me to manage. So again, it really becomes your responsibility to like look at this and how long have they been on this for? Like, can we start de-seeing some of this stuff? Like they've been on it for a while. And this is when your non-pharm interventions, they're gonna wanna know, when I start weaning them off or discontinuing this, how are they doing with the non-pharm interventions that you're doing? So it's really important to kind of keep that and manage up. Okay, yeah, go ahead. I'll do like 3 more questions and we'll move on.
Sorry. What makes the third generation antipsychotics better than A and B?
So primarily what we're looking at with the third generation antipsychotics is that they're more of a dopamine regulator. So it's a dopamine agonistic in the prefrontal cortex and dopamine antagonistic in like other areas of the brain. So it supports critical thinking, the intense cognitive part of the prefrontal cortex, and it limits the excessive dopamine in like the occipital temporal lobe. So it suppresses the positive like symptoms and supports some of the other functioning of like judgment, critical thinking in the prefrontal cortex. So it really helps to balance dopamine out, is what it does.
Okay, so for the 2A, it says second AP.
Second generation antipsychotic.
So why does it say third or C?
Yeah, so they can choose one of those, A, B, or C. Someone else had asked that too, like if they're on a third generation, would you also put them on a second generation as well? Like no, you wouldn't need to do that. But so you wouldn't see a third generation and a second generation, that's like contraindicated. So if you do see that, let them know, hey, you have them on risperidone and a aripiprazole, like do you want to continue two antipsychotics simultaneously? Because what are you putting them at risk for with that? With 2 simultaneous antipsychotics. Second and third don't really have a high occurrence of EPS, but it's going to put them at a risk for neuroleptic malignant syndrome. You're blocking too much dopamine, you're going to have a problem with that. So
The mood stabilizer depending on what you're experiencing in the field. So the manic or depressive, that's when you get the second one. And then so is that like a PRN?
it might be regularly ordered for like 3 doses, but should be limited. It shouldn't be a standing order like every day until we discontinue it.
I think the visual though is gonna be, I think the visual is putting the mood stabilizers in that buffer zone. So I think, no, I mean.
Yeah, I could bring it down in there. Yeah, I could do that. Like this just helps. That's why I try to make it blue too, but this just helps.
There you go.
Guess I should change this to yellow then. Benzo's everything. Nice color representation.
What's the benzo for?
The benzo is because they're not eating or sleeping, right? So they're at the risk for exhaustion. I don't want to push them towards a rest. So let me sedate them to give them a chance, their body to catch up. Same reasoning for like why sometimes people will be induced in a medical coma, that your body is like under massive repair right now because of massive infection or something. I need your metabolic demands to go way down because your body's trying to catch up. So same idea here, your metabolic demands are too high, you don't have nutritional reserves. I need to sedate you to get you to give you a chance to catch up. Bring your metabolic demands down. Here, then there.
For the mood stabilizers, would you normally see a combination of lithium and an anticonvulsant, or is it either or?
No, it's either, it's only one of the mood stabilizers to be used. At max, you'll have 3 meds. When they DC and they go home, they should only have 1, which is the mood stabilizer.
Oh shoot, I get you.
Oh, sorry.
So this is only the
But remember, depression, I could have poor sleep, I could have poor appetite. So if I'm not eating or sleeping, that's when you want to use the benzos.
What if they're taking the third and they're experiencing mania?
They're taking a third what? What do you mean?
Third generation antipsychotic for mood stabilizer, and they're still experiencing mania.
So this is a rather complicated case, but if they are still in mania and I give them a third generation antipsychotic, the third generation isn't very good at treating potent positive-like symptoms, so they'll most likely change it. So I'm going to temporarily put you on like lithium, switch you over to second generation. Once you're stabilized, then I'm going to switch you back to third generation. Yeah.
And then what if they're like sleeping too much? What do we give them instead of a benzo?
If they're sleeping too much,
If they're on a depressive state, yeah.
we're not going to medicate because they're sleeping too much.
Okay.
Someone else had asked me too earlier, what happens when they're in a manic episode? What food should I avoid or be careful of? Any food that's a stimulant, right? So coffee is be very careful about coffee because that's going to increase all those levels. It's going to make their symptoms worse. And usually the CNAs are taking care of that for you. So if they're dishing out coffee to everybody, just make sure that it's caffeine free, not decaffeinated. Decaffeinated still has caffeine in it, so it needs to be caffeine free.
Is it easy to spot out like someone with ADHD and mania?
Okay, so ADHD and mania, there are some similarities there. So the hyperactivity would be difficult to differentiate. The impulsivity would be difficult to differentiate, and inattentiveness is also key to ADHD. So it would be really hard. With ADHD, the way the diagnosis is made for that is, do they display these symptoms in more than one setting? So do they have these type of symptoms at home and at school? Or is it only at school? Or is it everywhere? If it's everywhere, then it could be mania. Does it subside in a week? Probably mania. But if it's continuous, then it's probably ADHD. That would probably be something in the history I would look for, right? Like, let's see how you do with caffeine and see if it makes things worse or if it makes things better if you don't have caffeine. All right, we're good? Okay. Let's do a lightning round with lithium. Lightning. All right, stick with me, everybody. Lithium, chemically classified as a what?
Mood stabilizer.
Chemically classified as a salt.
Oh.
What organ is responsible for excreting salts?
Kidneys.
Kidneys. So this means that before I give lithium, I need to check what values. If my BUN is 32, am I administering this?
No.
If my creatinine is 3.2, am I administering this? No. Okay, so be careful about that. Since I'm thinking about the kidneys, what do the kidneys need to excrete?
Water.
Kidneys need H2O. So you want to make sure that your client is drinking 2 to 3 liters of water per day. What else do the kidneys need to excrete? It uses some chemical to pull things across those membranes. It uses sodium. It uses sodium to pull things across those membranes to help excrete it. So if I am not consuming enough sodium, then I'm not going to be able to excrete lithium. So be careful, because a lot of people think, oh, I'm galaxy brain. Lithium is a salt, so they don't need to eat sodium. No, the body uses those very differently. So make sure that they're still maintaining a normal sodium diet. Do not tell them to decrease the amount of sodium. It needs to be a normal amount. Does anyone know of another drug that helps the kidneys excrete?
Basics?
Like diuretics? No diuretics. Unless it's a sodium-sparing diuretic, that's fine. But no diuretics. Contraindicated. So if I have a medical condition where they need diuretics and they also have bipolar and they need a mood stabilizer, guess what they're going to say? Sorry, the medical condition is going to take precedent over mental health. So this is why we might say lithium is contraindicated in you because you have congestive heart failure. We need you to be on this diuretic. We're going to use something else instead, like like an anticonvulsant or third generation antipsychotic. So our body is very finicky. It's very selective at how much lithium we put into it because it really affects everything all over the body. You know, that influx of cations and anions across those membranes for muscle movement, for cognitive functioning. So we need to make sure that we're in a very particular range. So to establish that mood buffer that we talked about earlier, we need to check serum lithium levels to make sure that the person's not going too high and we're in a therapeutic range. So what we're looking at here for therapeutic level, you can check this after about 3 days. I want my client to be 0.6 to 1.4 milliequivalents per liter. 0.6 to 1.4 milliequivalents per liter. That's my therapeutic range for lithium. Some medical providers may want to be even more specific, and they'll say, well, I want to be more aggressive in the acute phase. I want them to be 0.8 to 1.4. Sometimes in outpatient, they say, we don't need to be as aggressive, so let's go towards the bottom range, 0.6 to 1.2. I don't need you guys to differentiate that, but if you've been in clinical practice and you're wondering why they have two separate ranges, that's the reasoning why. So it's either they're a little more on the aggressive side in the acute phase, or if it's more maintenance phase, they'll choose the lower range. Either way, they're going to be between that 0.6 to 1.4 is what we're looking at. So let's start talking about how do we know my client is reaching toxicity? Yeah. No, the serum level, no. I mean, but overall, yes, because it depends on how their kidney's functioning. So if I'm older, diabetes, it's going to be more likely for me to have elevated levels of lithium. But the therapeutic range will still be the same. But as a provider, I'm going to want to go towards the bottom range because your kidneys have difficulties with that. So when I start to look at lithium levels greater than 1.5, what do I start to see? What do you think the kidneys are going to do saying, whoa, 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 you're having a lot of salt intake right now?
You start peeing.
Polydyspia, polyuria, they're going to start to urinate a lot, they're going to start to want a lot of water. You might start seeing fine tremors around 1.5, because you're going to start to see some motor dysfunctions there. So very fine tremors around that. Fine tremors are actually a common side effect on initial treatment, but they should subside after about a week or two on treatment. But check that lithium level. This is a sign that they're having those tremors. They could be reaching that 1.5 level. As that level increases, the toxicity begins to increase. We start reaching levels like 2.0, around there. What's going to happen? The kidneys are really going to want to get rid of that. So you're going to see extremely dilute urine, like very clear. Extreme thirst. The person's going to start to become very confused. We're going to start to see some cognitive issues and start seeing gross tremors as those symptoms start to get worse and worse. Once I start approaching like 2.5, we're looking at death. The level of consciousness goes so low that they'll go into a comatose state. They're going to be losing massive amounts of fluid, and they'll go into cardiac arrest. So at a level of 2.5, they're starting to become very stuporous. They're not really responding much, only to like a sternal rep. Maybe they're starting to swap my hand away. And I know their lithium level's very high. Does anyone know of a medical procedure that could do the job of the kidneys for it? Hemodialysis. So they'll do emergency hemodialysis if the level's too high. Emergency hemodialysis. What about if it's like a little bit earlier in toxicity, like 1.7, 1.8? They may just use like urea or mannitol to kind of help the kidneys excrete the extra lithium. So urea or mannitol at earlier stages of toxicity, hemodialysis for late stages of toxicity. If the person intentionally overdosed, they could cause levels to go really high. So the medical provider might do a gastric lavage, like let's just try to pump the stomach out, or give them activated charcoal if it's early enough. What else would cause someone to go into toxicity? We said intentional overdose, but let's look at this chart right here. What would cause someone's lithium level to go very high?
enough heat.
Dehydrated, so the kidneys don't have what it needs to excrete it. So sure, I'm not drinking enough water. What else?
Liver damage. Kidney
They're on
damage.
diuretics.
They're on a diuretic. No one caught that, and that's going to cause the lithium level to go very high. What else?
Kidney damage.
Kidney damage, as evidenced by my labs too. I can look at those, or especially searching blood in the urine. That's not a good sign. That could be another cause of potential toxicity. We're missing one more thing.
Unintentional doubling the dose unintentionally. I forgot.
Yeah, we said that overdosing. Yeah, taking too much. Missing one more thing. Huh? What about the diet?
Dash.
Yeah, if they're on like a DASH diet or very low or no sodium diet, that's very concerning. It's not going to be enough sodium to excrete out the lithium, and that could lead to toxicity. A lot of things to have to worry about with lithium, so you don't really see it too much, but for some people it can be very helpful, but a lot to worry about. Do we understand everything on here then?
Yeah.
To think why do we need to think about their water? Why do we need to think about their food? Why do we need to check kidney functioning? And if we don't, what does it look like when things are out of range and things are not normal? What could be responsible for elevated levels of lithium? We talked about elevated levels. What might be responsible for low levels? 3 days later, you check the dose and it's 0.3. Can anyone think about why would someone's dose be 0.3 after 3 days of taking it?
AKD.
Drinking too much. Too much salt. They're pocketing it, yes. They're not actually taking it. Those are some reasons why it could be too low. So don't go too aggressive and say we need to increase the dose and the frequency right away, right? Just be careful. Let's see if we can look at changing some other things first. I've seen that happen too much where the medical provider isn't really paying attention to these other things, and the nurse isn't either, so they'll just, okay, let's double the dose and increase the frequency, and then it's like the next day they're in toxicity already. So it's like the client was just drinking a lot because it's summertime, so they're just trying to hydrate themselves. So that was the reason why the lithium level was low. So now you did way too much. You went overboard on that, so be careful. Initially, they'll check it like after 3 days, then it'll turn to a week, then 2 weeks, then once a month-ish. Yeah, so they'll have to go every month and get their labs drawn.
Intervention or toxicity.
Early toxicity, think of like urea and mannitol to help the kidneys function, and then late toxicity would be like emergency hemodialysis. If anyone's ever known to intentionally overdose, like they took too much, and it's within 30 minutes to an hour, they might do the gastric lavage, or they might do activated charcoal too, it just depends. But you're kind of running a risk there, because if you're not absolutely certain on the time frame, it's not going to do anything and you're wasting time. That's like an ER type situation. Okay, so we're good with lithium, we're good with medications. Okay, so what we're going to talk about next then is, what if lithium doesn't work? What if anticonvulsants don't work? What if none of these medications are just not effective? What can we do? Do we just say, well, too bad, so sad?
Second gen.
There's a last resort type of thing that we can do, a medical surgical intervention to help with treatment-resistant bipolar, treatment-resistant schizophrenia, treatment-resistant depression. This is going to go with a theory that we said earlier of neuroplasticity, where we're trying to have the brain generate new neuronal pathways, trying to have the brain function a little bit differently. So how can I tell the brain, you need to do things differently because the way you're doing things right now is not working? The way we're going to do that is by introducing an electrical shock to the brain called electroconvulsive therapy. So we're going to intentionally cause seizures to the client. We're going to connect them to an anode and a diode, or cathode and an anode onto their head, give them a prescribed amount of joules, induce a seizure, and we'll do that about up to 12 times. So it sounds scary, but I promise it's treated very much like a medical surgical procedure, like a surgery. You're going to have like your neuropsychologist there. You're going to have a registered nurse, an anesthesiologist. The client is put to sleep so they don't feel any pain. They won't. they're not awake during the procedure. You can touch the client when they're being shocked. It's not like you got electrocuted to or anything like that. But we do this to try to tell the brain, you need to reset. Reset the pathways you're taking, reset your regulatory mechanisms, and it's actually very effective. It works really, really well. I used to do this for a couple months when I was covering someone on a pregnancy leave, and it was kind of amazing to see people come in after one treatment that have been struggling with depression for years, and they're just like, I just feel like a cloud's been lifted out of my head. Like, I don't feel like down. I want to go do things now. Before, I would just want to stay at home, and like now I just want to go do things. One of the most dramatic things that I've seen was we were treating this person who used to do a lot of competitive bicycle riding, and he had lost his wife in a motor vehicle accident and fell into this deep depression for like 3 years. Nothing was working for him. First round of ECT comes out of, once he starts recovering from the anesthetic agent, he's just like, I want to go ride my bike today. He's like, I haven't ridden my bike in over a year, and I want to go out there and do that today. Like, I feel just the motivation to go and do those things now. So very dramatic change for some people. It's an in and out, it's outpatient. You come in, 30 minutes to an hour, you're done. It actually takes you longer to recover from the anesthetic agent than the actual procedure itself. The actual procedure itself is maybe less than 5 minutes, very quick. So they're gonna actually be in recovery longer than they're gonna be in for the actual procedure itself. So what you're worried about the most with ECT is honestly just the possible reactions to the anesthetic, like the propofol that they'll probably use to sedate the client. Sometimes they'll give them like acetylsuccinate to as a muscle relaxer too, so they won't seize up and have any like broken limbs or anything like that, some muscle issues. But the actual procedure itself, transient memory loss. It's nothing really major that happens after this. Transient memory loss, and that's probably honestly related just to the anesthetic agent too. So they'll just kind of, when they start to wake, like, where am I again? Well, what am I doing here? But they'll be ready to go in like 30 minutes to an hour. They can just go back and keep living their life. But the thing about this, because we're affecting this externally, we're doing this external intervention. If it's genetics, what are the genes going to want to do after you try to fix them? They're going to want to go back. So after about 6 months, the genes will slowly go back into the way they were before, and the person will start to experience the symptoms again, if it's related to diathesis. If it's just stress-induced, it can cure it. But if it's related to diathesis, the genetic piece, the genes will start to express that same dysfunction after time. So typically, the person will go like 2 to 3 times per week, less than an hour, and they do this for about 12 sessions in total, 6 to 12 sessions-ish in total. And then again, after about 6 months, it wears off, and they have to do that for the rest of their life. So about 2 times per year.
And this is, you said it's last resort.
Yeah.
So steps, so mood stabilizers, then you have your outside buffer, sedate the patient to come back to
This can act like a kickstart for the meds. So this can help the meds be effective.
Okay.
But either way, the effectiveness wears off at about 6 months.
Okay.
And even for ECTs, for some people, it doesn't help.
So
The reason why it's viewed as last resort is because imagine that you have to go for 6 to 12 sessions, 2 to 3 times per week. That means a month out of your life, 2 times a year. You can't work, you can't function. It's very difficult because you have to go into the hospital 3 times per week, and it's difficult for me to function for the rest of the day. So it's like you kind of have to go on some type of disability almost. So it's like it can be very disruptive to the person. That's why they usually call it a last resort type.
So if it's diathesis after the 6 months, they're gonna have to, it'll start over.
It'll go back. Or if the person's just constantly enduring stress and they're not adapting to it, it's gonna go back. It's gonna go back. So again, this is where we come in. We can make a major impact by teaching them adaptive defense mechanisms, because if we could do that, then that sets them up for the rest of their life to be at a much lower risk of relapse. Yeah.
Would anything bad happen if they weren't treatment resistant and they would just didn't want to take meds and they somehow knew about this and wanted this instead?
So they don't want to do meds, they just want to go straight to this? They could do that. That would be up to the provider, because again, it's something that they'll have to kind of continuously do. So sometimes they're hesitant to do that, but you can. Some people will say, I don't want meds, I don't want any treatment. I'll just manage my own episodes of mania and depression. There's a lot of celebrities who do that, like Kanye West, for example, very outspoken that, yeah, I have bipolar. Even one of his albums is called like, I have bipolar. But he's like, he calls his episodes of mania like his superpower. He's like, when I'm manic, I can make such creative songs, very good music. He also says some things he probably shouldn't say too, but there's a lot of celebrities that are like, yeah, I have bipolar, and when I'm in mania, that's when I get stuff done, so I don't want to stop that. The depressive episodes are terrible though. I just want to kill myself, and I have to tell myself it's part of my illness. I feel really crummy for the next week, but I just got to get through it.
Is this something that they show in the
You wouldn't really see this in kids because they really wouldn't diagnose bipolar that early. So they'll be very hesitant to diagnose bipolar, usually 17, 18, because a lot of the symptoms of bipolar, it can look like, natural increases of like estrogen or testosterone, those mood fluctuations. So they'd be hesitant to say that, this is normal teen angst versus bipolar. Anyone used to watch Little Bear when they were growing up?
What show?
Little Bear? That's what the soundtrack reminds me of.
Little Bear.
Electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT, is often called a treatment of last resort for patients who haven't had success with drug therapies, who have life-threatening psychiatric conditions, or who are suffering a catatonic state. ECT induces a brief seizure in a patient which resets the brain functions associated with some psychiatric disorders.
It's typically indicated for treatment-resistant psychiatric conditions, most commonly mood disorders or depression, but there are multiple types of depression, so it can also be used to treat bipolar depression.
The majority of ECT treatments are managed like outpatient procedures, and the patient is given general anesthesia.
When the patient's asleep, the stimulus is delivered, the seizure is monitored, they'll have just one seizure.
An electrical current is given to the brain, low enough not to harm the patient, but high enough to trigger a seizure. The treatment team can even touch the patient.
The thing that concerns patients the most is that they know that they will be having a seizure. They're concerned about what may be happening while they're either asleep or while they're having that seizure. And thanks to the anesthetic, it's very hard to tell. In fact, the only way you can truly tell if they're having a seizure or not is to kind of monitor the motor activity and then monitor the EEG activity.
The patient awakens soon after and is monitored for a short while like any patient who has undergone general anesthesia. Within a half hour, they'll be discharged. In some cases, a handful of ECT treatments may be all that's needed to make medication therapy work. For other patients, regular recurring ECT treatments may be needed. In Morgantown for the WVU Health Report, I'm Dr. Raleigh Sullivan.
Kind of interesting. There's not very many facilities that do this. I think like Loma Linda is like one of the only ones in this area that kind of does this regularly, but it's typically just an outpatient type thing. So that's ECT. That's the last resort, non-pharm intervention to help treat this, and it can be very, very effective in individuals. Okay, we're done with that. Let's switch on over to depression. I have a little bit of time left. I'm not gonna go over the symptoms of depression right now. I'm gonna talk about the medications and talk about some serious implications for the medications. If you are unfamiliar with symptoms of depression, I just want you to think of negative-like symptoms. So anhedonia, avolition, that poor levels of dopamine, poor levels of serotonin. We've seen symptoms like that before. They're negative-like symptoms of schizophrenia. But if you really want to look more into it, you can definitely look at that because there'll be some things that are a little bit different. But for the most part, you already know what the symptoms are. It's really what we're looking at is low levels of serotonin. It's going to cause a lot of these mood disruptions being very, very low. with one of the main symptoms that we're concerned about the most being suicidal ideations. So we're going to look at medications that are trying to improve reception of serotonin by either causing more serotonin to be released or tricking the synapse into thinking there's more serotonin there that's actually there. But again, coming back to this theory of neuroplasticity, it takes months for the brain to start making these final changes for structure and chemical changes. So if you're enduring a lot of stress, like nursing school, and if you're not managing that stress appropriately, because it's a 2-year program, nursing students are highly susceptible to develop anxiety and depression. So with that in mind, it takes the same amount of time to make a change, to make a difference. So if I feel like I have symptoms of anxiety and depression because of chronic exposure to stress, it's going to take you the same, about 6 months of treatment without meds, 6 months without meds to kind of help your brain get back into that normal state. Now, 6 months is a long time to tell somebody that you're going to keep experiencing these symptoms for months. It's very discouraging. So we have these medications that could speed up the process, and they speed it up by about a 4 to 6 week window instead of 6 months. So a lot of the drugs that we talk about, I don't like the fact that they're called antidepressants because people think it's like a magic happy pill when it's not. This just influences your brain to produce and to be more receptive to serotonin. It is not going to help you feel happy right away. That's not what this does. It just sets you up to be in a position to where you can cure it. So if I'm not doing the proper behaviors and if I'm not changing the way I perceive my world, these drugs will do absolutely nothing. They will not work. So when you look at the statistics for these drugs, they'll say that it's only effective in 40% of the population. Because if you don't do CBT therapy or some type of behavior therapy with it, these drugs are absolutely worthless. They will not work. So in other words, it's kind of like saying, you know, I'm trying to relieve traffic, so I built all these new highways and all these new lanes for traffic, but now no one's actually taking the freeway, so they're still taking the side streets. So there's still congestion everywhere in traffic. So in other words, you need to do these behaviors that tell your brain to start using these new pathways that have been established. And without that, it's just not going to work. It's very ineffective. And with the problem with this is that a lot of prescribers who are not trained in psychology or as psychologists or psychiatrists, for some reason, they still have prescriptive authority to give psychotropic medication. So I'm a family practitioner. Here's an antidepressant. I'm not really going to tell you about the risks and benefits of it, but here you go. So you see a lot of these providers handing it out like candy, and the clients think that, oh, all I have to do is take this and my depression will be cured. That is not the case. It's a very difficult road of treatment, and it requires a lot of work on the individual to actually get to help cure depression. It can be cured with meds, and it can be cured without meds. So not everybody needs medications to cure depression, but it can really help fast track the development of making those symptoms go away. So we're going to talk about 2 different generations of antidepressants. I'll talk about some serious implications for each of them, and then we're going to talk about suicide and things like that. So let's split these up. All of these drugs, I wish they would just be called serotonin agents, not antidepressants, but unfortunately that's the case. We have first-gen antidepressants. These will be our TCAs and our MAOIs. Tricyclic antidepressants, monoamine oxidase inhibitors. These drugs, all of these antidepressants are mainly trying to help the brain have more serotonin in the synaptic space. So tricyclic antidepressants, they're serotonin reuptake inhibitors. That's what they are. But they reuptake serotonin, or they block the reuptake everywhere over the body, not just the brain like our other type of drugs do. So TCAs block the reuptake of serotonin everywhere, which is going to cause some serious side effects for some people. Some people can have severe anticholinergic effects. Severe urinary retention, severe orthostatic hypotension, severe dry mouth. It's a very common side effect with TCAs. Sometimes they're used off-label to actually help stimulate appetite, because the part of the brain that is very receptive to TCAs is also shared with appetite. So some people with eating disorders, you might see things like nortriptyline, amitriptyline, those types of TCAs prescribed to help stimulate appetite. But it's off-label use for that. But just be very careful about the severe anticholinergic effects with TCAs. They're very prominent with those.
So first generation antidepressant is a category. Is TCA another category? Or
No,
is
the umbrella is first generation antidepressants. Within the umbrella is TCA.
Okay, and in TCA there's types of meds that are TCAs.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And like the most popular ones, nortriptyline and amitriptyline are very common TCAs. Next we have MAOIs, monoamine oxidase inhibitors. So these drugs do exactly what they say. They inhibit the enzyme monoamine oxidase. So it stops the destruction of dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine. Even though I'm really just trying to target serotonin, it does that for all of any type of monoamine chemical in the body. So what is very concerning about this, there's a monoamine chemical in our body called tyramine. Tyramine is a vasoconstrictor. It tells the blood vessels to start constricting in different areas of the body. So if I'm taking an oxidase inhibitor, so I'm stopping my body to destroy things like serotonin, which is good because I want more serotonin, I want to feel better, but I'm also stopping the destruction of a vasoconstrictor called tyramine. What does that put me at risk for? It's going to put me at risk for very high blood pressure, not just high blood pressure, this is going to be called hypertensive crisis.
You know what? Maybe that's for my patients.
So easy, just avoid tyramine. Don't consume any tyramine, and you can take these drugs and you won't have that type of problem. But here's the general rule, everybody. This is also one of those gold standard questions that you're always going to see no matter what. A client is taking isocarboxazid, a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. Which of the following food items should the client avoid? Here's the main rule. Any food that has to sit before you eat it, it starts to exponentially build up tyramine. So I want you to think about what are some foods that must sit before you eat it.
Meat.
Or like, to be more specific, some foods have to ripen off the vine before you eat it.
Oh.
Cheese.
Cheese has high tyramine, especially if it's aged, like cheddar, a lot of tyramine in that. What else? Avocado, high tyramine in that.
Grapes.
What kind of grapes? Not all of them have to ripen off the vine, but what do people do with grapes? Wines, yes, those sit in caskets for months. High levels of tyramine. Yep. Raisins, plantains have to ripen off the vine for a little bit. If you're one of those people that like to eat figs,
Yeah, dried fruits.
yeah, figs have high levels of tyramine. So if you find yourself having a lot of headaches, what are you eating? Just be careful because you might be eating a lot of foods that are rich in tyramine. You like bacon? Not anymore, you don't. That has tyramine in it, right? So any kimchi, things that have to ferment, you can't have kimchi anymore. That has high levels of tyramine.
What is it that MAOI does again?
So there's an enzyme that when a neurotransmitter goes back into the synapse that sent it, there's an enzyme that'll say, hey, you're not in a vesicle, you're free floating, I'm gonna denature you and recycle you, your parts. So that what the MAOIs do is disable the enzyme from denaturing it. So what happens? It goes back into the synapse and then it just gets released again. So it gets a second chance at life, third chance at life, and it just keeps doing that. So if you have tyramine though, you're giving tyramine multiple chances to say vasoconstrict, vasoconstrict, vasoconstrict. So you have to watch out for foods that are fermented or that have to age for a little bit. This is the main reason why you don't see these drugs that common, because you have to have a very controlled diet. So if you're someplace like Patton or Telecare, you might have seen an MAOI because I know what you're eating and you're here for a long time, especially Patton. But for the most part, you're not going to see this because there's just too many foods you have to worry about, too many interactions. There was a case when I was working in the emergency department where this client came in for hypertensive crisis. He had woke up one morning and said, I'm not feeling good. I'm feeling depressed. My wife has antidepressants, so I'm going to go into the medicine cabinet, take her antidepressant, which was isocarboxazid, an MAOI, because I want to feel better today, I'm feeling down. He went to, if you're familiar with Moreno Valley off Paris and Elder, there's a Carl's Jr. over there. He was like, I want a hamburger. I like Carl's Jr. too. I want to help my mood. Goes to Carl's Jr., gets a bacon guacamole cheeseburger. Took this isocarboxazid, sitting in his car, was listening to some music after he ate, and he just said that I started feeling something was really wrong. I just started feeling really sick. So he said it started happening very quickly, so he quickly called 911 and he just left his door open and just told them, I'm at Carl's Jr. off Elder, and then that's all that they told the dispatch. So they brought him into RUHS, and sure enough, that's what the problem was, that, you know, he's having this, his blood pressure when he came in, it was like 195 over 125, I think it was when he came in. So they're like, if he didn't call 911, or if we were probably like 10 minutes later, he would have been dead. He would have had an ischemic stroke and a cardiac arrest at the same time with how much tyrosine was in his system. So
luckily that EMS is in that same parking lot too.
yeah, because they're always over there. But I don't know how close they were. But thankfully he called in, and thankfully the hospital wasn't too far either. So he would have died if we were a little bit later. But.
Oh my Carl's Jr. burgers?
Yeah. So what was the problem with the cheeseburger? Well, the cheese, the guacamole, the bacon, all of that in one. So that was supposed to be his last meal before he went to heaven, I guess. But Jesus said, not today. We've got more work to do. Okay. Those are some serious things to think about with TCAs and MAOIs. Now we're going to go over to our second generation. SSRIs, SNRIs. These are also named after the mechanism of action of what they do. They're selective, so they target more of the receptors found in the brain, so their side effects aren't as systemic, but they are a little bit more concerning, especially when it comes to SSRIs. You're going to have a lot of sexual dysfunction, erectile dysfunction in men, female sexual arousal disorder in females too, so just very difficult for them to become sexually aroused. SNRIs, you want to be careful about high heart rate and avoid caffeine. And in some cases, this can actually cause anxiety. Now, all these drugs take time, about 4 to 6 weeks for them to start becoming effective. It takes time. They're not going to start to feel any effects immediately. However, all of these drugs are capable of producing something called serotonin syndrome. Because we're targeting serotonin, if we cause too much to be released in the brain, what else is serotonin responsible for? For things like temperature. It's responsible for other things aside from psychological. So be aware of serotonin syndrome. Thankfully for us, serotonin syndrome looks exactly the same as neuroleptic malignant syndrome. So what acronym are we going to look at? Yes. Same thing. You'll see a little bit more hyperactive vowel sounds though, and their pupils will dilate or mydriasis on this. This is some of the subtle differences, but for the most part, think of fever. This is going to be caused from an intentional overdose on serotonin, or they combine a natural source of reuptake inhibitor with their drug. So they'll say, I'm going to fight my depression on two fronts with a synthetic drug like Prozac or fluoxetine, and I'm going to go to Sprouts. And there's also another drug that they said, or this plant. It also is an antidepressant. It's called St. John's wort. So every day I'm going to drink a tea of St. John's wort, then take my fluoxetine at the same time, and I'm going to fight it on both fronts. No, you're double dosing on a SSRI. St. John's wort is an herb. The mechanism of action of that is a reuptake inhibitor for serotonin. So essentially the person is causing a double dose of serotonin to be released in the brain. Remember, the brain is very slow at making changes, so if you're all of a sudden introducing too much of it at once, you're going to go into serotonin syndrome, and you'll die if it's not caught. So be careful about that. Same symptoms as neuroleptic malignant.
TCA.
All of them. Yep, if I take St. John's wort with any one of these, bad. If I mix an MAOI with any of these, bad. Yeah, especially MAOIs. MAOIs are like potentiators. That makes everything much more potent. A lot of people like to mix drugs with MAOIs, and you're talking about an exponential increase in effect. Very dangerous.
That the serotonin syndrome can happen with any of
Any
these
drugs, yep. Most commonly though with SSRIs and SNRIs because they have a higher affinity for that in the brain, but it can still happen with any of them. The one last thing that I need to tell you all about when it comes to these drugs, because they're acting on serotonin, there's something that could happen in the first 24 to 48 hours that's very concerning. It's called activation syndrome. Activation syndrome. It causes a sudden burst of serotonin to be released in the brain, which is what we want. But if my thoughts are to kill myself, but I haven't had the energy or motivation to do it, these drugs can cause a burst of serotonin to where all of a sudden you have a higher sense of energy and now you have a sense of motivation. But what are you thinking about? What are you motivated to do? If I'm thinking about suicide, you're now giving me the energy and motivation to complete it. So this is why sometimes when you hear the commercials for antidepressants like may increase thoughts of suicide and death, it's because if you're not going through that behavior and cognitive therapy with it, if you're not thinking about how do I change my behaviors and thoughts, and I just take an SSRI, now I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna jump off that bridge. I'm actually going to do this now. I'm actually going to overdose now. I have the energy to. The only reason why I haven't completed my plan is because I just haven't felt motivated. I haven't had the energy to climb the mountain or climb whatever it was for their plan for suicide. So be careful of activation syndrome. How do we know this is happening? There are very specific behaviors we want to look out for. Giving away belongings, precious belongings. Giving away precious belongings. Hey, I don't need this first edition holographic Charizard anymore. It served me well, but you can have it now. Or, you know, here's my favorite car that I have. You can go ahead and have it. I don't need it anymore. Giving away my favorite clothes, my favorite jewelry, things like that. 2, tying up loose ends. You might overhear the conversation say, hey, thank you so much, Mom. You've always been a big supporter of me in my life, and I just want to tell you thank you. You hear them calling different people in their lives and just telling them, thanks for being there. I appreciate all the help. I just want to tell you thanks. That's like tying up loose ends. Or they ask if you can give them resources to write a living will. So when you see these behaviors after you've given the first dose of one of those drugs, red flag. Red flag. That person's come to terms with, I'm going to do this now. I'm going to complete suicide. Now, the thing that makes suicide so difficult is a person can display none of these. Suicide can, statistically speaking, be very random, where the person displays no behaviors. There was no indication, and they still complete it anyways. So be very careful about these behaviors with or without drugs. Be very careful of these behaviors. And one last acronym that I want you to think about when it comes to suicide is MILK. Means, intent, lethality, and covert. So when the client says, I have suicidal ideations, these are the questions you need to ask next. Do they have the means or plan? Do they have a means or plan? So I want to kill myself. I want to shoot myself. Do they actually have a gun? So that would be a next line of questioning. I want to jump off a building, a 10-story building. Where do they live? Are there actually any 10-story buildings nearby? Do they have the means to do this? I is intent. I'm suicidal, but I would never do it. I have no intent. I have suicidal ideations, nurse. Is completing suicide something you would actually do? No. Or yeah, I would do it. So that's the next question you ask is there actually intent? Do you actually intend to do this? A lot of clients will say, I want to kill myself, but it's against my religion, so I will never do it. But it's something I think about a lot. L is lethality. Split up into hard and soft. Hard equals instant. Soft equals time. Is the person's plan instant death, or does it take time? This is important in terms of prioritizing, because when you're working in the ED or you're working in med-surg unit, you might have 4 patients that are all suicidal ideations. Which one do you see first? You see the client who has a plan that is lethal, or they attempted a hard method and failed. I shot myself, I jumped off a building and survived. Those are very high risk. You need to see those people first and supervise those people first, versus I want to starve myself. I took 4 Flintstone gummies, I want to end my life. I took a bottle of toothpaste. You know, those are soft methods. The only one that's confusing for some individuals is carbon monoxide poisoning. That is hard. There is no coming back from carbon monoxide poisoning. I can strap 15 liters of O2 to your face and that will do nothing to you. You're just going to slowly suffocate. Carbon monoxide poisoning, people will usually drive into their garage, close the garage door, and they inhale the carbon monoxide. They'll just slowly feel sleepy and they fall asleep. So it's a very non-painful way to kill themselves. So most people will try to do that. I won't go over why that's hard, but if you want to know why, I'll tell you after class. So we have these hard methods are instant, soft methods take time, starvation, overdosing. You don't die instantly from that stuff. Last is covert. You're looking for covert statements. Is the client hiding behind their intent? Do you want to kill yourself? And they don't answer you directly. I think everyone would be better off without me. I think my family would be in a better place without me. They're not directly saying what they want to do. It has a hidden meaning. That's called a covert statement. Versus the very close cousin, overt is obvious. There's an O in front of overt. I want to kill myself. I am going to shoot myself. It's very obvious what their intent is. But if there's a C in front of it where you have to clarify, you know, you can't see me kind of thing, like I need to clarify this statement, that's covert. Either way, it's just as serious. Don't say, well, they said everyone would be better off without them, but they never said they wanted to kill themselves. You need to take them with equal weight. That's the important difference between those two. They're the same thing. Don't minimize the covert statements. What does this do, everybody? This helps you with your judgment. Do I keep the person here, yes or no? Third day of treatment, I just started treating them with fluoxetine. I'm seeing all of this stuff now. Do we keep them? Do they have means, intent, lethality, covert statements? Are they displaying these behaviors? This is your judgment call to me. Do we keep them, yes or no? Some facilities will use a suicide scale. So let's say I don't trust my nurse's judgment with this. I'm going to give them a very specific tool to help them with their judgment. Like you might have seen Columbia Suicide Risk Scale. At this week's worksheet packet, I gave you SAD persons. SAD persons looks at specific statistical factors to help nurses make their judgment of how suicidal is this person. You don't have to memorize the scale, everybody, but I highly recommend you take a look at that scale to familiarize yourself with what are risk factors for suicide. That's what I want you to look at. And I gave you some exercises that here's a clinical scenario. Use SAD persons to see how many risk factors do they have. Again, not every facility will use this. What does it mean by itself? Really nothing. It's just to help you make that call of they can't DC, they're not ready yet. The risk is too high. All right, everybody, that's it. Thank you so much. I apologize for keeping a little bit later than class is supposed to go on for. Thank you all for the last seminar of the term with me. So, if you have any questions about any of the material, please reach out to me Wednesday, Thursday, 5 to 7. Email me, please email me. You're not bothering me. If you need to email me. Check out all the resources for this week. I'll have about 20 questions from the objectives that we talked about today. Other than that, everybody, if you're doing, I don't think anyone's doing telehealth today, but we are, okay, telehealth is open today with Mr.